A steaming kettle of boiling water was poured out. The wrinkled skin of the disabled mother shriveled as a cry of pain tore through the silence. The daughter-in-law, dressed in a white silk gown, her eyes cold as ice, tilted the electric kettle once more. The scream shattered the perfect silence of the Williams estate. A sound so raw and primal, it seemed to crack the very foundation of the sprawling Hamptons mansion. It tore through marble hallways, bounced off crystal chandeliers, and penetrated closed mahogany doors, transforming the elegant home into something else entirely. A crime scene. Marcus Williams stood frozen in the doorway of his mother's East Wing suite, his 6'3" frame suddenly diminished by the horror before him. The 14-hour flight from Tokyo had left his custom suit wrinkled, his eyes tired from closing the semiconductor acquisition deal that would transform his company. He'd returned a day early to surprise his family. Instead, he was the one who received the shock. "Victoria, what are you doing to my mother?" His wife stood over his wheelchair-bound mother, an electric kettle still tilted in her perfectly manicured hands, steam rising from both the kettle and Eleanor Williams's scorched skin. For a moment, the tableau before him seemed frozen in time. His mother's face contorted in pain, her thin arms raised in a futile attempt to shield herself, Victoria's emerald eyes wide with something that wasn't quite shock, but rather calculation. "Marcus," Victoria said, her voice oddly calm despite the chaos she'd created. "You're early." Those two words. Not, "I can explain," or "this isn't what it looks like." Just the simple acknowledgement that her timing had failed, that he wasn't supposed to be there to witness this moment of brutal truth. The kettle slipped from Victoria's fingers, clattering against the imported Italian marble. Boiling water splashed around her Louboutin heels, drops beating on the red soles without seeming to affect her composure. Her white Chanel dress remained pristine, except for a few water spots near the hem, ironically resembling tears. "Mom," Marcus breathed, rushing past Victoria as if she were a stranger. He knelt beside the wheelchair, his hands hovering uselessly above his mother's burned skin, afraid to touch and cause more pain. "Mom, I'm here. I'm going to get you help." Eleanor Williams, 73 years old and trapped in her wheelchair, wasn't screaming anymore. Her thin arms were angry red where the boiling water had struck, blisters already beginning to form across weathered skin that had once scrubbed floors and washed dishes through decades of hardship. But it was her eyes that Marcus couldn't look away from, deep brown eyes so much like his own, filled not with hatred or even fear, but with something far more devastating. Resignation. As if some part of her had been expecting this all along. "Not her fault," Eleanor whispered, her voice cracking with pain. "Money changes people, son. I should have known." Outside, distant thunder rolled across the Atlantic, visible through the wall of windows that faced the private beach. The afternoon had turned dark without warning, matching the atmosphere that had descended upon the Williams estate. Angry waves crashed against the shore below, as if the ocean itself was responding to the violence inside the house. Marcus pulled out his phone with shaking hands, dialing emergency services. "I need an ambulance. My mother's been burned, badly." His voice sounded strange to his own ears, tight, controlled, but with an undercurrent of something dangerous. He gave the address, then added, "Send police, too." Victoria hadn't moved. She stood like a statue in her white designer dress, now spattered with drops of boiling water. Her blonde hair remained immaculately styled, her makeup unsmudged despite the violence of her actions. Only her eyes betrayed movement, darting between Marcus, Eleanor, and the fallen kettle, as if trying to piece together how they had all arrived at this unimaginable moment. "Marcus," she tried again. "You don't understand what's been happening while you've been gone." He didn't look at her. Instead, he carefully took off his suit jacket and draped it gently over his mother's shoulders, mindful of her burns. "Don't talk to me," he said, each word precise and sharp as broken glass. "Don't say a word." Outside, the distant wail of sirens began to cut through the thunder. Help was coming. But Marcus knew, with a certainty that settled in his stomach like a stone, that some things couldn't be fixed with bandages or medicine. Something fundamental had broken in this house today, something that no amount of his billions could ever repair. As paramedics rushed in minutes later, Eleanor reached for Marcus's hand, Her grip was surprisingly strong for someone so frail, her palm calloused from years of work before her son's success had changed everything. "Promise me," she whispered as they lifted her onto a stretcher. "Promise you'll listen to the whole story, not just what you think you saw." Before Marcus could answer, they were taking her away, efficient hands checking vitals and applying temporary dressings to her burns. One of the paramedics was already on the radio, describing second-degree burns, possible shock, elderly patient with pre-existing conditions. Two police officers entered next, their expressions carefully neutral despite the obvious wealth surrounding them. "Mr. Williams?" one asked, glancing between Marcus and Victoria. "We need to understand what happened here." Marcus looked at his wife. For 7 years she had been his partner, his confidant, the woman who'd stood beside him as Williams Tech had grown from promising startup to industry giant, the woman he'd built this coastal palace for, the woman who now stood accused by the evidence of his own eyes. "My wife," he said, the words sticking in his throat, "poured boiling water on my mother. I saw it happen." Victoria didn't deny it. She didn't break down or plead or try to run. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and addressed the officers directly. "I'll come willingly," she said. "But there's something in the study you should see. A document. It might help explain." As the officers led Victoria away, Marcus remained rooted to the spot, surrounded by the remnants of what had happened. Drops of water still steaming on the floor, the overturned kettle, the lingering smell of burned flesh and expensive perfume mingling in the air. Through the open door, he could see the hallway with its family photographs, images of happier times that now seemed like elaborate lies. His phone buzzed. The hospital confirming Eleanor's arrival. They needed information, authorization for treatment. Marcus answered mechanically, providing details about her medications and history. When he hung up, the house felt impossibly empty. The officer who remained watched him carefully. "Sir, your wife mentioned a document in the study. Would you like to show me what she was referring to?" Marcus nodded numbly. The study had been his father's before the cancer took him 20 years ago. Now it was Marcus's sanctuary, the one room in this massive house that still felt like home. He led the way down the hallway, past the spiral staircase imported from an Italian palace, past the living room where celebrities and tech giants had mingled at their housewarming party. The study door was ajar. Inside, everything looked undisturbed. The antique desk, the wall of books, the vintage chess set his father had taught him on. But on the desk, conspicuously placed in the center, was a folder he didn't recognize. "I didn't leave that there," Marcus said, approaching cautiously as if the papers might bite. The officer followed. "Do you mind opening it, sir?" Marcus flipped open the cover and immediately felt the room tilt around him. The document was from his company's legal department, a transfer of power of attorney for Eleanor Williams. It would have given Victoria complete control over his mother's affairs, including her 15% ownership stake in Williams Technologies. At the bottom was his mother's signature line, still blank. "I don't understand," Marcus murmured, flipping through the pages. "Why would Victoria need this? My mother's mentally sound. She doesn't need anyone making decisions for her." The officer made a note in his pad. "We'll need to take this as evidence." Marcus nodded, still trying to process what it meant. His mother owned part of his company, shares he'd insisted she take when they went public, despite her protests. "You believed in me when no one else would," he'd told her then. "This is yours by right." The shares were worth over $3 billion now. Was that what this was about? Money? The thought made him physically ill. Thunder crashed directly overhead now, and rain began to lash against the windows. Marcus sank into his father's old leather chair, suddenly exhausted beyond words. On the desk was a framed photograph, Marcus at his MIT graduation, his arm around his mother who beamed with pride. She'd worked 3 jobs to put him through school after his father died, cleaned houses during the day, including many in this very neighborhood, worked night shifts at a 24-hour diner. Her hands had been perpetually raw from cleaning chemicals, hands that now bore scalding burns inflicted by the woman he had promised to love forever. The reality of what had happened, what was still happening, hit Marcus like a physical blow. His mother was in an ambulance, fighting through pain he couldn't imagine. His wife was being taken to a police station, and he was sitting in a mansion that suddenly felt like the emptiest place on earth. His phone rang again. Williams' Tech's PR team, somehow already aware that something was wrong. News traveled fast in their circles. They needed a statement, a plan for damage control. Marcus ended the call without speaking. Outside, the storm intensified, rain hammering against the house with unrelenting force. The officer was saying something about needing a formal statement, about following up at the hospital, about the legal process that would follow. Marcus barely heard him. Instead, he was remembering Eleanor's whispered words. Promise you'll listen to the whole story, not just what you think you saw. What hadn't he seen? What could possibly explain or justify what Victoria had done? As if in answer, lightning flashed across the sky, momentarily illuminating the entire room in stark white light. In that instant, Marcus noticed something he'd overlooked, a small digital recorder partially hidden beneath the folder on his desk. It wasn't his. With a growing sense of dread, he reached for it, pressed play, and heard his wife's voice fill the room. I'm sorry it's come to this, Eleanor. I really am. But you need to sign these papers. Marcus doesn't need to know. He's halfway around the world closing the Nakamura deal. By the time he gets back, it'll all be settled. You'll have a generous allowance. The company's shares will be managed more efficiently. Everyone wins. Then his mother's voice, soft but steely. I may be old and broken, Victoria, but I'm not a fool. Those shares belong to my son's future children. Your children. I won't sign them away because you're afraid he might leave you. Afraid? Victoria's laugh sounded nothing like the woman Marcus had married. You think I'm afraid? You're the one who should be afraid, old woman. You think he'd choose you over me, the woman he sleeps beside every night, the woman who could give him children if I wanted to? You're nothing but a burden he carries out of duty. If that's true, Eleanor replied calmly, then why do you need me to sign anything? Why not ask him yourself? A pause, then the sound of something being set down hard. The kettle. Last chance, Eleanor. Sign the papers, or we'll see just how much your precious son loves you when you're even more damaged than you already are. The recording stopped. Marcus stared at the device, then up at the officer whose expression had changed from professional detachment to undisguised shock. I need to go to the hospital, Marcus said, standing abruptly. My mother needs me, the officer nodded. We'll need that recording, sir, and we'll have more questions. Take it, Marcus replied, already moving toward the door. Take anything you need, just make sure she pays for what she did. As he stepped into the hallway, his phone buzzed with an incoming text. Unknown number. The message contained just 4 words that made his blood run cold. This is just beginning. Marcus stared at the screen, then looked back at the study where the officer was carefully placing the recorder in an evidence bag. Outside, the storm continued to rage, waves crashing against the cliffs below the house, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled like a warning of what was still to come. The story of the billionaire, his burned mother, and his dangerous wife was just beginning to unfold. And Marcus Williams, for all his wealth and power, had no idea how deep the deception around him truly went, or who he could trust in the storm that was about to break over all their lives. If you believe a mother's love is sacred, type respect in the comments below. Where are you watching from? New York? Texas? California? Let us know while we continue this shocking true story of betrayal, sacrifice, and the true meaning of family. The Williams family had not always lived behind gates and security systems. 25 years earlier, home was a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in South Boston where the winter drafts whistled through poorly sealed windows and the radiator clanked like it was speaking in code. It was there that Eleanor Williams raised her son after cancer claimed her husband Michael when Marcus was just 13. We may not have much, Eleanor would tell her son as she buttoned up her uniform for the evening shift at Donnie's diner. But we have each other, and we have your brain. That beautiful, brilliant brain is going to take you places, Marky. Marcus would watch from the window as his mother trudged through snow or rain to catch the bus, her small frame somehow appearing tall despite the weight she carried. During the day, she cleaned houses in the wealthy neighborhoods, scrubbing other people's marble floors and dusting their crystal chandeliers. At night, She served truckers and night shift workers at the 24-hour diner, bringing home leftover pie and coffee that had grown cold but still tasted like luxury to them. Despite her exhaustion, Eleanor always made time to help Marcus with his homework, to attend his science fairs, to champion his growing interest in computers. She'd saved for months to buy him a second-hand computer, ancient by today's standards, but to teenage Marcus, it was a portal to another world. "Mom, look what I figured out," he'd exclaim, showing her lines of code that meant nothing to her, but that she praised as if they were poetry. "That's my boy," she'd say, her eyes crinkling with pride. Her hands showed the raw evidence of her labor, skin cracked from cleaning chemicals, nails broken short, calluses like armor. The defining moment came when Marcus was 16. He developed a simple program that improved computer processing speeds, nothing revolutionary, but impressive for a self-taught teenager. When he won the state science competition, a scout from MIT was in the audience. "Your son has remarkable potential," the man told Eleanor afterward. "He should apply to our computer science program." That night, after Marcus had gone to bed, Eleanor sat at their small kitchen table with a calculator and their meager bank statements, trying to make impossible math work. College applications cost money, SAT tests cost money, and even if Marcus got a scholarship, there would be books, housing, meals, money they didn't have. 2 days later, she took on a third job, early mornings at a laundromat before her house cleaning shifts began. Marcus noticed the deepening shadows under his mother's eyes, how she sometimes dozed off mid-sentence at dinner, how her hands shook slightly as she poured their morning coffee. "Mom, you're working too hard," he'd protested. "I can get a job too." "Absolutely not," she'd replied firmly. "Your job is to study, to get into that college, to build the future I know you can have. My job is to make sure you get there." When the acceptance letter from MIT arrived with a partial scholarship, Eleanor wept with joy. It wasn't a full ride. They'd still need thousands of dollars they didn't have. But she hugged Marcus fiercely and said, "We'll make it work. We always do." She sold their few pieces of good furniture. She took out a small loan against her life insurance policy. She worked holidays and double shifts until finally, in the fall of 2005, she watched her son walk onto the MIT campus wearing a new coat she'd saved 6 months to buy him. "I'm going to pay you back for everything, Mom," Marcus had promised, hugging her goodbye. "Someday you won't have to clean another toilet or serve another plate of eggs." "I don't need fancy things, Marky," she'd replied, straightening his collar. "I just need to know you're becoming the man your father would have been proud of." At MIT, Marcus flourished. His natural talent for coding, combined with an unexpected gift for seeing market opportunities, set him apart. By junior year, he'd developed a security algorithm that caught the attention of venture capitalists. By graduation, he had seed funding for his first startup, Williams Security Systems. The early years were lean. Marcus worked from a rented garage space, living on ramen and determination. Eleanor continued working at the diner, sending him care packages of homemade cookies and newspaper clippings about internet security. "My son, the computer genius," she'd scrawl across the articles. The breakthrough came 5 years after graduation. Williams Security Systems pioneered an encryption method that major banks and government agencies scrambled to implement. Overnight, Marcus went from struggling entrepreneur to tech world darling. The garage became an office building. The small team grew to hundreds, and Marcus, now 27, became worth millions. The first thing he did was buy his mother a small house in a safe neighborhood with a garden she could tend and windows that didn't let in drafts. He hired a service to clean it weekly, a luxury that made Eleanor laugh with the irony. "All those years cleaning for rich folks, and now I have someone cleaning for me," she'd say, still insisting on doing most of it herself anyway. Doesn't seem right. Marcus visited whenever he could, but the demands of his growing company kept him increasingly busy. Williams Security Systems became Williams Tech, expanding into consumer electronics, artificial intelligence, and eventually quantum computing. The millions became billions. Marcus's face appeared on magazine covers. His name entered the lexicon of tech innovators mentioned alongside Jobs and Musk. And through it all, Eleanor remained his anchor, the voice on the phone asking if he was eating properly, the woman who still sent him birthday cards with $5 bills inside for a coffee, the mother who looked at his empire and still saw her little boy. Then came the accident. Eleanor, 71 and still fiercely independent, fell while gardening. The hip fracture was complicated by her age and a previously undiagnosed heart condition. The surgery was successful, but the doctors were clear. She would need assistance from now on. Her days of complete self-sufficiency were over. Marcus didn't hesitate. "You're coming to live with me," he told her in the hospital room, already making arrangements. "Nonsense," Eleanor protested weakly. "I'm not leaving my house. My friends are here. My garden. We'll visit often. I'll build you an even better garden, with a greenhouse so you can tend it year-round. Marcus, you have your own life. A wife now. You don't need your old mother underfoot." Ah, yes. The wife. Victoria Chambers had entered Marcus's life like a whirlwind 3 years earlier, at a charity gala for children's technology education. Marcus, now 34 and one of America's most eligible bachelors, had been instantly captivated by the art gallery owner with the emerald eyes and quick wit. "Your mother must be so proud of you," Victoria had said that first night, her hand resting lightly on his arm, "to see her son change the world." "She still thinks I spend too much time on computers and not enough time eating vegetables," Marcus had replied with a laugh. Their courtship had been swift and glamorous. Private jet weekends to Paris, yacht parties in the Mediterranean, their names linked in society columns and tech blogs. Victoria brought color and culture to Marcus's work-focused existence. She introduced him to art, to fine wines, to a social circle that valued beauty and style as much as innovation. When Marcus proposed 6 months after they met, the ring had cost more than the entire apartment he'd grown up in. Their wedding was the social event of the year, covered extensively by the press, attended by celebrities and tech royalty alike. Eleanor had attended in a dress Victoria had chosen for her, looking small and somewhat lost amid the opulence. "It's beautiful, Marky," she'd whispered during the reception, "but it doesn't quite feel real, does it?" He'd known what she meant. Sometimes his own life didn't feel real to him either. The distance traveled from that drafty South Boston apartment to his current existence seemed impossible. Like a story happening to someone else. Victoria and Eleanor had been cordial from the beginning, but never close. They were separated by generation, background, interests. Eleanor with her gardening and simple pleasures, Victoria with her gallery openings and designer wardrobe. Marcus had tried to bridge the gap, organizing dinners and holidays together, but there remained an undercurrent of tension he couldn't quite identify. "Your mother still sees you as her little boy," Victoria had commented once after a Thanksgiving dinner. "It's sweet, but a little suffocating, don't you think?" Marcus had defended Eleanor immediately. "She sacrificed everything for me. She worked herself nearly to death so I could get where I am." Victoria had smiled, touching his cheek gently. "And now you've taken care of her for life. The debt is paid. Darling, you don't need to keep proving yourself to her." But it had never been about debt to Marcus. It was about love, about respect, about remembering who had believed in him when no one else did. When he'd insisted on giving Eleanor 15% of Williams Tech at their IPO, shares now worth billions, it wasn't charity. It was recognition of her as the co-architect of his success. Victoria had been noticeably cool when she learned about the shares. "That's extraordinarily generous," she'd said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Though I wonder if your mother even understands what to do with that kind of ownership." "She doesn't need to do anything with it," Marcus had replied. "It's her legacy, security for her future." "Our future children's inheritance walking around in an old woman's name," Victoria had murmured. So quietly Marcus wasn't sure he'd heard her correctly. Now, as Marcus made arrangements to move his mother into their Hamptons home after her accident, those faint warning signs seemed more significant. Victoria had agreed to the plan, but her enthusiasm felt performative, her smile tight around the edges. "We'll convert the East Wing guest suite," Marcus had decided. "It has the best view of the ocean, and we can make it fully accessible for her wheelchair." "The East Wing?" Victoria had questioned. "But that's where we host visiting artists for my gallery. Couldn't she use one of the smaller suites in the West Wing?" "Mom deserves the best view," Marcus had said firmly. She spent years looking at brick walls and alleyways. Victoria had acquiesced, but the first fault line in their marriage had visibly cracked open. More followed, small at first, then widening with time. Victoria began scheduling more international art-buying trips that coincided with Eleanor's physical therapy appointments, leaving Marcus to handle them alone. She hosted dinner parties where Eleanor was technically included, but seated far from the main conversation. She redecorated areas of the house Eleanor frequented, replacing comfortable furniture with avant-garde pieces that were difficult for an elderly woman to use. "I feel like I'm in the way," Eleanor confided to Marcus 6 months after moving in. "Maybe I should look into one of those nice assisted living facilities." "Absolutely not," Marcus had insisted. "This is your home now. Victoria will adjust." But Victoria hadn't adjusted. Instead, she'd grown more distant, spending longer hours at her gallery, taking more solo trips abroad. The warm, vivacious woman Marcus had fallen in love with seemed to be fading, replaced by someone colder, more calculating. Marcus had attributed it to the natural stress of having an in-law living in their home. He'd tried to compensate by being more attentive to Victoria, by surprising her with gifts, by trying to recreate the excitement of their early relationship. But the distance continued to grow. What he didn't see, what he was too busy or perhaps too unwilling to notice, were the private conversations between his wife and mother when he wasn't present. The subtle power plays, the veiled comments, the growing tension like a pot slowly coming to boil. He didn't see Victoria reviewing the company's financial documents late at night, calculating exactly what Eleanor's 15% stake was worth. He didn't notice how she tracked his mother's medication schedule with unusual interest. He missed the significance when Victoria suddenly began spending time with a lawyer specializing in competency hearings and power of attorney. Marcus Williams, the man who had built an empire on seeing patterns others missed, failed to see the dangerous pattern forming in his own home. Until that fateful afternoon when he returned early from Tokyo, walked through his front door, and heard his mother's scream echoing through the marble halls of the fortress he'd built to keep her safe. Now, sitting in the hospital waiting room while doctors treated Eleanor's burns, Marcus turned these memories over in his mind, searching for the moment when everything had started to go wrong. The foundation of his success had always been his mother's sacrifice. The foundation of his marriage had been Victoria's apparent love and support. With both foundations now cracked, he felt as though the entire structure of his life was in danger of collapse. His phone buzzed again with another text from the unknown number. "Ask her about the offshore accounts. Ask her what else she hasn't told you." Marcus stared at the message, a chill running through him despite the hospital's warmth. Who was sending these? What offshore accounts? And most importantly, what else didn't he know about the two women who mattered most in his world? Has someone in your family sacrificed everything for you? Comment, "Thank you, Mom," to honor them. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to be reminded about the power of a mother's love. If you're watching from around the world, let us know where. We love hearing from our global family of viewers who understand what true sacrifice looks like. The morning of the incident dawned with deceptive tranquility. The Atlantic stretched out beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Williams mansion, a sheet of blue-green glass occasionally broken by the white spray of waves against the cliffs below. Inside, the house hummed with the quiet efficiency of wealth, climate control maintaining perfect temperature, smart systems adjusting lighting as the sun rose, household staff moving discreetly through their morning routines. Victoria Williams woke alone in the master suite, as she had for the past 2 weeks while Marcus was in Tokyo finalizing the Nakamura acquisition. She reached across the king-sized bed, hand brushing over the empty space where her husband should have been. 2 weeks. The longest they'd been apart since their marriage 4 years ago. She checked her phone. No messages from Marcus yet. The time difference meant he was probably in meetings, or maybe he was simply pulling away, his attention increasingly divided between his company, his mother, and whatever was left for his wife. Victoria rose, wrapping herself in a silk robe as she moved to the window. From this vantage point, she could see most of the 7-acre estate, the infinity pool glittering in the morning light, the tennis court where she occasionally played with friends, The helipad Marcus had insisted on installing for efficiency, all the trappings of success, all the evidence of having arrived. So why did it feel so precarious? She performed her morning ritual methodically, 40 minutes of yoga in the private studio adjacent to their bedroom, a carefully prepared breakfast of avocado toast and green tea, a shower in the rainfall shower with imported Italian tiles. By 9, she was dressed in a white silk shift dress, her blonde hair styled in loose waves, makeup applied with professional precision. The image in the mirror was flawless. Victoria Williams, tech billionaire's wife, gallery owner, tastemaker. No trace of the anxious woman who had lain awake until 3, calculating risks and contingencies. At 9:30, her phone chimed with an incoming message, not from Marcus, but from Anton Zharkov, her gallery's largest investor. The text was brief. Wire expected today, no exceptions. Victoria deleted the message immediately, a habit formed over the past year. She'd call Anton later from the secure line in her gallery office. For now, she had other priorities. The east wing of the mansion felt like a separate building entirely, with its own climate system, kitchen, and staff entrance. Marcus had insisted on this independence for his mother. She values her privacy, he'd explained, though Victoria suspected it was more about keeping Eleanor as far from her daughter-in-law as possible while still being under the same roof. As Victoria approached the suite, she could hear the morning nurse, Maria, chatting cheerfully as she helped Eleanor with her physical therapy exercises. "Good morning," Victoria called, entering with a practiced smile. "How are we today?" Eleanor sat in her wheelchair by the window, dressed in a simple cotton blouse and slacks, a stark contrast to Victoria's designer outfit. Despite her 73 years and the accident that had left her partially paralyzed, there remained a dignity to Eleanor Williams, a straightness to her spine that spoke of a lifetime of standing tall through hardship. "We're managing just fine," Eleanor replied, emphasizing the we slightly. Her eyes, so much like Marcus's, assessed Victoria coolly. "Maria was just helping me with my exercises." "Wonderful," Victoria turned to the nurse. "Maria, I can take over from here. You're free to go for the day." "But Mrs. Williams's afternoon medication," Maria began. "I'll handle it," Victoria interrupted smoothly. "My husband asked me to spend some quality time with his mother today, woman to woman." Maria hesitated, glancing at Eleanor, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Very well. I've left the medication schedule on the counter. The pain pills are at 1 o'clock, not before." "Thank you, Maria," Eleanor said warmly. "See you tomorrow." As the nurse gathered her things and left, a subtle shift occurred in the room. The air seemed to thicken, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. Victoria moved to the kitchenette and busied herself preparing tea, her back to Eleanor. "So," Eleanor said into the silence, "what's this quality time my son supposedly requested?" Victoria smiled without turning around. Can't a daughter-in-law want to connect with her husband's mother without an ulterior motive? "In my experience, people like you always have motives," Eleanor replied, her voice matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. "Especially when they start dismissing nurses and making tea they never normally drink." Victoria returned with 2 cups, setting one on the table beside Eleanor. "People like me." "Rich people," Eleanor clarified, though they both knew that wasn't what she'd meant. "I cleaned their houses for 30 years, remember? I know when someone's preparing to have a difficult conversation." Victoria sat in the armchair opposite, arranging her dress carefully around her. "Marcus called this morning." It was a lie, but a strategic one. Eleanor's expression flickered with interest. "Is he coming home early?" "No." Victoria took a deliberate sip of her tea. "But he is concerned about some company matters. Matters involving you, actually." Eleanor didn't touch her tea. "What matters?" "Your shares in Williams Tech." 15%, quite generous for someone with no technical knowledge or business experience. "My son wanted me to have security. And now you have it. This house, the best medical care, staff at your beck and call." Victoria set her cup down with a soft clink. "But the shares themselves, they represent voting power in the company, power you don't use. Because I trust my son's decisions." "But what if something happened to you?" Victoria asked, her voice softening with artificial concern. Have you considered what would happen to those shares? Who would make decisions on your behalf if you were incapacitated? Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly. Is that a threat, Victoria? A practical consideration. You're not getting younger, and your health is already compromised. Victoria reached into a slim portfolio she'd brought with her, extracting a document. This is a simple power of attorney agreement. It would allow me to manage your financial affairs if you become unable to do so. Eleanor didn't even glance at the papers. Where did these really come from, Victoria? Because my son would never ask me to sign away control of my shares without discussing it with me directly. He's trying to protect you from the stress of business decisions. My son has never tried to protect me from anything real, Eleanor said firmly. He knows I'm stronger than I look. Victoria's composure slipped slightly, a flash of frustration crossing her perfect features. This isn't about strength, it's about practicality. The company is at a critical juncture with the Nakamura acquisition. All shareholders need to be aligned. And you think I wouldn't support my own son's vision? I think you're an unpredictable variable in an equation that needs certainty. Victoria pushed the document closer. Sign it, Eleanor, for Marcus's sake. Eleanor wheeled herself slightly away from the table, from Victoria, from the papers. I've watched you for 2 years now, living in this house. I've seen how you look at me when Marcus isn't watching. I've noticed how you schedule gallery events when he's supposed to visit me, how you redecorate spaces to make them less accessible for my wheelchair. That's ridiculous. What I haven't figured out, Eleanor continued as if Victoria hadn't spoken, is whether you truly love my son or just what he represents. His wealth, his status, the doors his name opens for you. Victoria stood abruptly, her calm facade cracking further. You don't know anything about me or what I feel for Marcus. I know you're afraid, Eleanor said quietly. I can smell it on you like expensive perfume. The question is, what are you afraid of, Victoria? What happens if I don't sign those papers? The room fell silent, except for the distant sound of waves and the soft hum of the climate system. Victoria stared at Eleanor, her emerald eyes calculating. Then, without warning, her expression changed, the mask of the perfect wife dropping away completely. You want to know what I'm afraid of? Victoria's voice was different now, harder, with a slight accent she usually kept hidden. I'm afraid of losing everything I've worked for, because an old woman thinks her sacrifice gives her the right to control her son forever. Eleanor didn't flinch. So it is about the money. It's about survival. Victoria moved closer, looming over Eleanor's wheelchair. Your precious son doesn't know everything about me, about the gallery, about where the money really comes from and goes. Money laundering, Eleanor said softly. That's what your gallery really does, isn't it? You use art to clean dirty money. Victoria went very still. How could you possibly? I may be old, but I'm not blind. The paintings that sell for millions to buyers no one ever sees. The international transfers. The meetings with men who look more like criminals than art collectors. Eleanor shook her head. I spent decades cleaning houses where illegal things happened behind beautiful facades. I recognize the signs. Does Marcus know? Victoria's voice was barely above a whisper. No, I was waiting to be certain before breaking his heart. Eleanor looked up at her daughter-in-law with something like pity. But you're running out of time, aren't you? That's why you need my shares, to liquidate them, to cover whatever hole you've dug yourself into. Victoria's composure shattered completely. She snatched up the document, shaking it in Eleanor's face. You think you know so much? You have no idea who you're dealing with. I didn't claw my way out of nothing to lose everything now. Sign the papers or I swear to God. You'll what? Eleanor challenged, still maddeningly calm. Kill me? Make it look like an accident? Marcus would never stop investigating. He'd find whatever you're hiding eventually. Victoria stepped back, visibly struggling to regain control. When she spoke again, her voice was eerily calm. You're right. Killing you would be stupid. She smiled coldly. But hurting you? Making your life so uncomfortable that you choose to leave? That's much more practical. She walked to the kitchenette, her movements deliberate. Eleanor watched as Victoria filled the electric kettle and switched it on. The soft bubbling of heating water filled the silence between them. "What are you doing?" Eleanor asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. "Creating a compelling reason for you to reconsider your position." Victoria watched the kettle, her back to Eleanor. "Did you know that water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit? Hot enough to cause second-degree burns instantly on contact with skin." Eleanor glanced toward the door, calculating the distance, knowing her wheelchair couldn't move fast enough. Instead, she reached for her phone on the side table, but Victoria noticed the movement. "Looking for this?" Victoria held up Eleanor's phone, which she must have taken earlier. "No calls for help, no convenient interruptions, just you and me and a decision that needs to be made." The kettle began to whistle softly, steam escaping from its spout. Victoria unplugged it and turned, the vessel held carefully in her manicured hands. "Last chance, Eleanor. Sign or discover exactly how serious I am." Eleanor straightened in her wheelchair, a lifetime of facing hardship evident in her unwavering gaze. "I survived poverty, widowhood, and breaking my back to give my son a future. You think boiling water scares me? Do your worst." Something flickered in Victoria's eyes, perhaps a moment of doubt, or perhaps just surprise at the old woman's defiance. Then her face hardened. "As you wish." She stepped forward, kettle raised. Eleanor instinctively raised her arms to protect her face, but kept her eyes open, refusing to look away from what was coming. What neither woman heard was the sound of the front door opening. Neither noticed the approaching footsteps until it was too late. The kettle tilted. Water arced through the air, catching sunlight from the windows as it fell. Steam rose in angry clouds as the scalding liquid met flesh. Eleanor's scream, a sound of pure pain and shock, echoed off the marble floors and high ceilings. And then came the voice, Marcus's voice, cracking with horror and disbelief. "Victoria, what are you doing to my mother?" The kettle slipped from Victoria's hands, clattering to the floor, spilling the remaining water across the imported tiles. She turned slowly, her face a mask of shock, to find her husband standing in the doorway, his expression transformed by a rage she'd never seen before. "Marcus," she whispered, "you're early." Those two words, so inadequate, so revealing in their inadequacy, hung in the air between them like a confession, not "I can explain," or "this isn't what it looks like," just the simple acknowledgement that he wasn't supposed to witness this moment. In the seconds that followed, as Marcus rushed to his mother, as he called for an ambulance, as the full impact of what had happened began to register, Victoria stood motionless, as if frozen in a terrible tableau of her own creation. The perfect life she'd constructed, the image she'd cultivated so carefully, the security she'd fought for, all of it shattered in the instant that water had left the kettle. Yet even as her world collapsed around her, part of Victoria's mind was already calculating, assessing, planning her next move. Because the truth was, what Marcus had witnessed was only the surface of a much deeper deception. The boiling water was just the visible eruption of pressures that had been building for years, pressures that involved offshore accounts, laundered money, dangerous people, and secrets that could destroy not just her marriage, but potentially Marcus's entire empire. As police sirens wailed in the distance, Victoria looked at the scattered papers on the floor, the power of attorney documents she'd tried to force Eleanor to sign. Then she glanced at the small digital recorder partially hidden beneath the coffee table, its red light blinking to indicate it was still recording. Eleanor had been prepared. The old woman had anticipated this confrontation and set a trap that Victoria had walked right into. Outside, storm clouds gathered over the Atlantic, mirroring the darkness that had descended upon the Williams household. The perfect life Victoria had constructed was over. The only question that remained was how many people she would drag down with her when she fell. And in that moment of clarity, as Marcus cradled his injured mother and glared at her with eyes that no longer held any trace of love, Victoria made her decision. If she was going down, she wouldn't go down alone. There were still cards she could play, secrets she could leverage, people she could implicate, including some very close to Marcus himself. The water had boiled over, but the real damage was just beginning. If you think Victoria's actions are unforgivable, comment, "Mother deserves respect," below. Would you have confronted her immediately or waited to hear her explanation? Let us know in the comments. Some viewers have been asking if Victoria had always been so cruel, or if something changed her. What do you think? Is greed something that grows slowly, or was it always inside her? Share your thoughts as we continue this shocking true story. Rain pounded against the hospital windows, sheets of water distorting the view of Long Island sprawling below. The waiting room on the burn unit's floor was empty, save for Marcus Williams, who sat with his head in his hands, suit jacket discarded, tie loosened, looking nothing like the confident tech mogul whose face graced magazine covers and conference keynotes. A paper cup of cold coffee sat untouched beside him. His phone, silenced after too many calls from Williams' tech executives and PR specialists, lay face down on the vinyl chair next to him. For the past 3 hours, he had existed in a strange limbo, too numb to process what had happened, too alert to find any peace. The elevator doors slid open, revealing Detective Sarah Reeves, her dark hair now damp from the rain, a manila folder tucked under her arm. She spotted Marcus immediately and approached with the measured steps of someone who had delivered difficult news many times before. "Mr. Williams," she said, sitting across from him without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk about your wife." Marcus looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "Is she still in custody?" "For now. She's been processed and is being held pending formal charges." Detective Reeves opened the folder. "We've executed a search warrant for your home and have collected evidence, including the recording device found in your mother's room." "Have you listened to it?" "Yes. It corroborates what your mother told us and what you witnessed." She paused, studying Marcus's face. "Your wife was attempting to force your mother to sign over power of attorney for her company shares, and when she refused, Mrs. Williams threatened her with the boiling water before carrying out that threat." Marcus nodded mutely. He'd already known this, had heard the recording himself, yet hearing it stated so clinically by the detective made it seem both more real and more impossible. "The district attorney is considering charges of assault with a deadly weapon, elder abuse, and attempted financial coercion," Detective Reeves continued. "Given the evidence and the severity of your mother's injuries, your wife is facing significant prison time." "I understand," Marcus said, his voice hollow. "What I need to understand," the detective said, leaning forward slightly, "is whether you had any knowledge of your wife's plans or actions prior to witnessing the assault." The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. "You think I might have been involved?" "In financial investigations. And make no mistake, Mr. Williams, that's part of what we're looking at here. We follow the money and the motive. Your wife stood to gain control over billions in company shares. It would be negligent not to ask if this was a joint effort." "I would never," Marcus began heatedly, then stopped himself, taking a deep breath. "No, detective. I had absolutely no knowledge of what Victoria was planning. If I had, my mother would never have been in danger." Detective Reeves nodded, making a note in her file. "Your wife has requested to speak with you." Marcus stared at her. "She what?" "She's been asking to see you since she was taken into custody. Says she has information you need to hear." The detective's expression revealed nothing of her thoughts on this request. "You're under no obligation to speak with her, of course." Marcus looked away, toward the rain-lashed windows. Could he face Victoria now? Look into the eyes of the woman who had deliberately hurt his mother? The woman he had loved, trusted, built a life with. "What kind of information?" he asked finally. "She wouldn't say, only that it was urgent and concerned both your company and your personal safety." Detective Reeves closed her folder. "Again, you don't have to—" "I'll see her," Marcus interrupted. "Not today. I need to be here for my mother, but tomorrow. I'll come to the station tomorrow." The detective nodded, then hesitated before adding, "Mr. Williams, we found something else during our search that you should be aware of. A burner phone in your wife's private safe, along with financial documents for accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. Accounts not in either of your names." Marcus frowned. "Whose names are they in?" "Shell companies. We're still tracing the ownership structure." She paused. "There was also correspondence regarding art sales through your wife's gallery. Sales with values that appear significantly inflated." "Money laundering," Marcus said quietly, remembering the cryptic text messages he'd received. "My mother suspected as much." Detective Reeves's eyebrows rose slightly. "Your mother knew about this?" "She noticed patterns, inconsistencies." Marcus rubbed his face tiredly. She was going to talk to me about it when I returned from Tokyo. I guess Victoria realized that and decided to act first. The detective made another note. We'll need a formal statement from your mother once her condition stabilizes. In the meantime, I'd advise you to have your company's financial team look into any potential connections between these offshore accounts and Williams Tech's operations. You think Victoria might have compromised my company? I think, Detective Reeves said carefully, that when people hide money, they usually have something to hide from. And when they're willing to commit violence to protect that secret, the stakes are typically very high. She stood to leave, handing Marcus a business card. Call me if you think of anything else. And Mr. Williams, you might want to consider additional security for both yourself and your mother, just as a precaution. After the detective left, Marcus remained motionless, her words echoing in his mind. Additional security, as if his billions, his technology, his carefully constructed world had not been enough to protect the person who mattered most to him. The irony was bitter. He'd built a fortune on keeping data safe, yet had completely failed to see the threat living under his own roof. His phone vibrated again. This time, he checked the screen. A text from Thomas Chambers, Victoria's younger brother and Marcus's friend since college. The message was brief. Just heard. Coming to the hospital. Need to talk. Marcus frowned. He hadn't spoken to Tom in nearly 6 months. Though he'd been the one to introduce Marcus to Victoria at that charity gala, the siblings had a complicated relationship. Tom had distanced himself after the wedding, citing his sister's changing personality and priorities. Marcus had assumed it was simple jealousy or perhaps resentment at Victoria's newfound wealth and status. Now he wondered if Tom had been trying to warn him in his own way. 20 minutes later, Thomas Chambers stepped off the elevator, shaking rainwater from his jacket. Unlike his glamorous sister, Tom was unassuming, average height, practical clothing, the kind of face that blended into crowds. A software engineer at a mid-sized tech company, he had always seemed comfortable in his modest success, immune to the status-seeking that drove so many in their industry. Marcus, he said, approaching with visible hesitation, how is she? Your mother? Stable. The burns are serious but not life-threatening. Marcus gestured for Tom to sit. The doctors are optimistic about her recovery. Tom sank into the chair Detective Reeves had vacated, his expression troubled. And Victoria? Is it true she's been arrested? Yes. Marcus studied his friend's face. I saw her do it, Tom. I walked in and saw her pouring boiling water on my mother. Tom closed his eyes briefly, a pained expression crossing his features. God, Marcus, I'm so sorry. I should have said something sooner. Said what sooner? Marcus asked sharply. Did you know she would do this? No, nothing that specific. Tom leaned forward, voice lowered, though they were alone. But I knew she was in trouble, financial trouble, the kind that makes people desperate. The gallery, Tom nodded. It started as a legitimate business. Victoria has always had a good eye for art, but about 2 years ago, she got involved with some people, collectors she called them, people with a lot of money who needed to clean it. Money laundering through art sales, Marcus said, the pieces falling into place. Artificially inflated prices for mediocre works, cash transactions, international buyers who never seem to actually take possession of what they've purchased. You knew? Tom looked surprised. I suspected something wasn't right with the gallery's finances, but I trusted Victoria to handle her business. Marcus laughed bitterly. I was too busy building Williams Tech to pay attention to what was happening in my own home. It's not that simple, Tom insisted. These people Victoria got involved with, they're dangerous. When she tried to back out after your mother moved in, they made it clear that wasn't an option. Marcus frowned. Are you saying Victoria was being threatened? I'm saying she dug a hole so deep that hurting your mother seemed like the lesser evil. Tom ran a hand through his damp hair. The gallery's been losing money for months. The legitimate sales can't cover the operational costs. The only real income is from the laundering fees, but Victoria's been skimming from those to keep the gallery afloat. Stealing from money launderers, Marcus said flatly. That's a special kind of stupid. She thought she could replace it before they noticed, but they did notice. They gave her a deadline, either pay back what she took, with interest, or they'd make an example of her. Tom hesitated. That's when she started looking at your mother's shares as a solution. Marcus stood abruptly and walked to the window, watching lightning flash across the darkened sky. "Why didn't you come to me with this, Tom? You're supposed to be my friend." "Victoria is my sister," Tom replied quietly. "Despite everything, I wanted to believe she could fix this herself, and to be honest, I was afraid of what these people might do if I interfered." The admission hung between them, heavy with implication. Marcus turned back to face Tom, studying him with new eyes. "Are you in danger now talking to me?" Tom smiled grimly. "Probably, but after what Victoria did to your mother, staying silent isn't an option anymore." "Do you have names? Anything concrete about these people?" "Nothing I can prove. Victoria kept me at arm's length from the details." Tom hesitated. "But I do know one thing that might help. The painting in your home office, the abstract one Victoria insisted on hanging there. It has something hidden in it, something important enough that she mentioned it once when she was drunk, then panicked when she realized what she'd said." Marcus frowned, trying to picture the painting. A large, abstract piece in blues and grays that Victoria had claimed was from an emerging artist she was promoting. He'd never particularly liked it, but had allowed it to remain because it seemed to matter to her. "Hidden in it how? Like something concealed in the frame?" "I don't know exactly. Just that if anything happened to her, that painting contained her insurance policy." Tom stood, checking his watch. "I should go. Being seen with you right now probably isn't safe for either of us." "Wait." Marcus pulled out his phone and sent a quick text. "I'm arranging a security detail for you. Professional, discreet. Don't argue," he added as Tom began to protest. "If these people are as dangerous as you say, you need protection." Tom nodded reluctantly. "What are you going to do now?" "First, make sure my mother is safe. Then," Marcus's expression hardened, "then I'm going to find out exactly what my wife has been hiding in my house, in her gallery, and in those offshore accounts." As Tom turned to leave, Marcus called after him. "Why did she do it, Tom? Not just the money laundering or the attack on my mother. All of it. Why marry me in the first place if it was just about money? She could have found easier targets." Tom paused, his back to Marcus. "I think it started as opportunism. You were wealthy, influential, a good connection for someone building an art business. But then what? Then I think she actually fell in love with you." Tom glanced back, his expression sad, which made it even worse when she realized she'd trapped herself in a life she couldn't sustain. Love made her more desperate, not less. After Tom left, Marcus returned to the chair, turning this idea over in his mind. Could it be true? Could Victoria have genuinely loved him while simultaneously betraying him so completely? The contradiction seemed impossible, yet he remembered moments of apparent sincerity. Quiet evenings at home, meaningful conversations, small gestures of affection that had felt genuine at the time. Had it all been an act? Or was the truth more complicated? That Victoria had compartmentalized her life so effectively that she could be both loving wife and calculating criminal, depending on which role the moment required. A nurse appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Williams, your mother's awake and asking for you." Marcus rose, pushing these questions aside for now. He followed the nurse down the corridor to Eleanor's room, steeling himself for the sight of her injuries. Despite the preparation, his heart clenched when he saw her, small and vulnerable in the hospital bed, arms bandaged, face drawn with pain despite the medication. "Marky," she said softly, using the childhood nickname she reserved for their most private moments. "You didn't have to stay all night." "Wild horses couldn't drag me away," he replied, taking her unbandaged hand gently. "How are you feeling?" "Like someone poured boiling water on me," Eleanor said with a weak attempt at humor, "but I'll survive. I'm tougher than I look." Marcus smiled despite himself. His mother's resilience had always amazed him, her ability to face hardship without bitterness or self-pity. "The doctors say your recovery will be slow but complete. No permanent damage." "Physical damage anyway," Eleanor amended. "The other kind takes longer to heal." They sat in silence for a moment, the only sounds the steady beep of monitors and the distant rumble of thunder. Finally, Marcus spoke the question that had been haunting him since the attack. "Why didn't you tell me what was happening? About your suspicions regarding Victoria's gallery? About her pressuring you to sign over the shares?" Eleanor sighed. I wanted proof first, not just suspicions. You love her, Marky. I couldn't tear that down without being absolutely certain. I saw her hurt you with my own eyes, Marcus said, his voice tight with renewed anger. What more certainty do I need? That's not what I mean. Eleanor shifted slightly, wincing at the movement. Victoria didn't act alone in all this. She's involved with dangerous people, yes, but there's someone closer to home who helped set this in motion. Marcus frowned. What are you talking about? Before I tell you, I need you to promise me something. Eleanor's eyes, despite the medication, were clear and intent. Promise me you won't seek revenge. Justice, yes. Accountability, absolutely. But not revenge. Mom, promise me, Marcus. Revenge would change you, twist you into something your father and I never raised you to be. Marcus hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. I promise to seek justice, not revenge. Eleanor studied him a moment longer, then apparently satisfied, continued. The painting in your office has something hidden in it, Marcus finished. Tom just told me. Surprise flickered across Eleanor's face. Thomas was here? He left a few minutes ago. He said the painting contains some kind of insurance policy Victoria was keeping. Did he tell you what it is? Marcus shook his head. He didn't seem to know the details. I do, Eleanor said quietly. It's a USB drive, hidden in the frame. It contains financial records, transactions, communications, account numbers, everything Victoria collected to protect herself if her business partners ever turned on her. How do you know this? Because I found it 3 weeks ago when Maria and I were alone in the house. Victoria had gone to New York for an auction. Eleanor's expression was apologetic. I had suspicions about the gallery finances. When I was younger, I cleaned houses for some very wealthy, not very ethical people. You develop an instinct. Marcus couldn't help but smile slightly at this reminder of his mother's shrewdness. So you searched her things? Just the painting. There was something about the way she always touched the frame when she was in that room, almost unconsciously, like reassuring herself it was still there. Eleanor paused. I copied the files, but left everything as I found it. I wanted to understand what we were dealing with before coming to you. And what did you find? Names, dates, transaction records. Eleanor's voice lowered, including regular payments to someone inside Williams Tech, someone with access to company security protocols and financial systems. Marcus felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath him. Someone inside my company is working with these people. Not just anyone. Eleanor held his gaze steadily. Richard Blake. The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Richard, his CFO, his friend since the company's earliest days. The man who had stood beside him as Williams Tech grew from scrappy startup to global powerhouse. The man who was godfather to the children Marcus and Victoria had planned to have someday. That's not possible, Marcus said automatically. Richard wouldn't. The evidence is there, Marky. Regular payments to an account in his daughter's name, emails discussing security vulnerabilities, meeting records with the same people Victoria was laundering money for. Marcus shook his head, struggling to process this new betrayal. If this is true, why didn't you bring it to me immediately? Because it would destroy you, Eleanor said simply. Not financially. The company would survive, but personally. Richard has been your friend for over a decade. I needed to be absolutely certain before I broke that bond. She squeezed his hand. I was going to show you everything when you returned from Tokyo. I just ran out of time. Because Victoria realized you knew, Marcus concluded, the pieces falling into place. That's why she moved against you today. She knew you had found her insurance policy and were going to expose everything. Eleanor nodded. I think she was trying to force me to sign the power of attorney documents as a stopgap. With control of my shares, she could have bought herself time, maybe even blocked an investigation into the company's security breaches. Marcus stood and paced the small hospital room, mind racing. I need to get that USB drive, and I need to make sure Richard doesn't realize we know about his involvement. Be careful, Eleanor warned. If Richard discovers you're investigating him, there's no telling what he might do. These people they're working with, they don't solve problems with lawsuits and negotiations. The implied threat hung in the air between them. Marcus had built his life around technology, innovation, the ordered world of code and algorithms. Violence had never been part of his reality. Until today. I'll be careful, he promised. And I'll make sure you have round-the-clock security until this is resolved. Eleanor nodded, then winced again as the movement pulled at her injuries. What about Victoria? Will you see her? Marcus hesitated. Detective Reeves said she's been asking to speak with me. Says she has important information. She's trying to make a deal, Eleanor surmised. Her cooperation in exchange for leniency. Probably. Marcus's expression hardened. But I'm not sure I can look at her without seeing what she did to you. You need to see her, Eleanor said firmly. Not for her sake, but for yours. You need answers, Marcus. Real ones, not just theories and assumptions. And if she lies to me, she's been lying for years apparently, then you'll know that too. Eleanor's eyes were growing heavy, the medication finally taking full effect. Truth has a different weight than lies. You'll feel the difference. Marcus leaned down and gently kissed his mother's forehead. Rest now. I'll be here when you wake up. Eleanor's eyes fluttered closed, but she murmured one last thing before drifting off. Remember your promise, Marky. Justice, not revenge. The difference matters. As Marcus settled back into the chair beside her bed, his phone vibrated with an incoming call. The screen showed Richard Blake's name and photo, his friend, his trusted colleague, the man who had apparently been betraying him for years. Marcus stared at the phone, mind racing. Should he answer normally, pretend he knew nothing, or let it go to voicemail while he formulated a plan? Before he could decide, another text arrived from the unknown number. The storm is just beginning. Trust no one. Outside, lightning split the sky, illuminating the rain-drenched city below. Marcus Williams, billionaire, tech genius, betrayed husband and son, sat alone in the darkened hospital room, watching over his sleeping mother while the foundations of his world continued to crumble around him. The kettle had boiled over, and nothing would ever be the same again. What would you do if someone you trusted completely betrayed you? Would you seek justice or revenge? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for the shocking conclusion to this true story. Have you ever had to choose between listening to your heart or your head in a crisis? Let us know. Your experiences might help others facing similar challenges right now. The rain had finally stopped by morning, leaving Long Island washed clean beneath a pale blue sky. Marcus Williams stood at the window of his mother's hospital room, watching the world come to life below. Traffic building on the expressway, medical helicopters landing and departing from nearby rooftops, people streaming into the hospital for shift changes. The ordinary rhythm of a world that hadn't stopped turning just because his had been shattered. Behind him, Eleanor slept peacefully, her medication ensuring she felt little pain from her burns. The doctors were cautiously optimistic about her recovery. No infection had set in, and the burns, while serious, would heal with time and proper care. Marcus had arranged for the hospital's best burn specialists to oversee her treatment, along with private security posted discreetly outside her door. His phone vibrated in his pocket, Richard Blake calling again. The CFO had left 3 voicemails since last night, each sounding progressively more concerned. Marcus had listened to them carefully, searching for any hint that Richard knew his betrayal had been discovered. But the messages seemed genuinely worried about both Eleanor's condition and the company's stability in the wake of what the media was already calling the Williams family scandal. Marcus let the call go to voicemail again. He wasn't ready to speak to Richard yet, not until he had seen the evidence on Victoria's USB drive for himself. Not until he was certain he could maintain the facade of normalcy while investigating the man he had trusted with both his company and his friendship. A soft knock at the door announced the arrival of Nurse Maria, who had insisted on returning to care for Eleanor despite Marcus's suggestion that she take paid leave until things stabilized. "Mr. Williams," she said quietly, respecting Eleanor's sleep, "there's a Detective Reeves asking to speak with you. She says it's urgent." Marcus nodded. "I'll come out. Stay with my mother?" In the hallway, Detective Reeves waited with the same manila folder from yesterday, now noticeably thicker. Her expression was grim. "We need to talk privately," she said without preamble. "Is there somewhere we can speak?" Marcus led her to a small consultation room down the hall, closing the door behind them. "What's happened?" "New developments in your wife's case." Detective Reeves laid the folder on the table between them. First, forensic accounting has made preliminary connections between the offshore accounts we found and several major art purchases through your wife's gallery. The money trail suggests laundering operations involving at least $20 million over the past 18 months. Marcus nodded. This merely confirmed what he already suspected. Second, the detective continued, your wife has provided a statement in exchange for consideration during charging and sentencing. She's cooperating? Marcus couldn't hide his surprise. To a degree, she's admitted to the assault on your mother and to participating in money laundering operations through her gallery. However, she insists she was coerced by threats against both herself and you. Convenient, Marcus said bitterly. Perhaps. But some of her claims are corroborated by evidence we've recovered. Detective Reeves removed several photographs from the folder, laying them on the table. These were found in a secure cloud account linked to the burner phone in your wife's possession. Marcus leaned forward to examine the images. They showed a man he recognized as Richard Blake meeting with two unfamiliar men in what appeared to be a private dining room. The date stamp indicated the meeting had occurred just 3 weeks ago. Do you recognize these individuals? Detective Reeves asked, indicating the strangers. Marcus shook his head. Only my CFO, Richard Blake. The others are unknown to me. We've identified them as Anton Zharkov and Philip Reyes. The detective pointed to each man in turn. Zharkov is connected to Eastern European organized crime with known operations in art theft and financial fraud. Reyes is a former banker with ties to several money laundering investigations, though he's never been charged. Marcus studied the images more closely. Richard looked comfortable with these men, smiling, sharing drinks, leaning in to speak confidentially. Not the body language of someone meeting dangerous criminals for the first time. There's more, Detective Reeves continued, sliding another photo forward. This one showed Victoria in the same private dining room, speaking with Zharkov while Richard looked on. This was taken the following day. So my wife and my CFO were both involved with these people, Marcus said flatly, working together. Not exactly, the detective countered. According to your wife's statement, Mr. Blake was the initial contact. He introduced her to Zharkov and Reyes about 2 years ago, suggesting her gallery would be perfect for their investment strategy. She claims she only realized the true nature of the arrangement after several transactions had already occurred. Marcus frowned. You don't believe that? I believe your wife is attempting to minimize her culpability, Detective Reeves replied carefully. However, other evidence does suggest Mr. Blake was the primary facilitator. Most notably, the financial transactions show larger commissions going to him than to your wife's gallery. And the attack on my mother? Is she claiming Richard put her up to that too? No, she admits that was her idea, though she says it was born of desperation. According to your wife, Zharkov had discovered she had been skimming funds and demanded repayment of $3 million by the end of this month. When she couldn't produce the money, he suggested she leverage family assets to cover the debt. My mother's shares in Williams Tech, Marcus concluded. Detective Reeves nodded. Your wife claims she never intended to actually harm your mother, that the boiling water was meant as a threat, not a serious assault. She says things got out of hand when your mother refused to be intimidated. Marcus laughed bitterly. That sounds like my mother. A lifetime of real struggle doesn't leave much room for fear of people like Victoria. The detective studied him carefully. Mr. Williams, there's something else you should know. We've uncovered communication between Mr. Blake and these individuals that suggests they may have had access to Williams Tech security protocols, potentially as early as 18 months ago. Marcus felt his blood run cold. What kind of access? The details are technical and still being analyzed by our cybercrime division, but the preliminary assessment suggests they may have been able to monitor internal communications, access financial data, possibly even manipulate security systems. My company specializes in security technology, Detective. If anyone had breached our systems, we would know. Unless the breach came from inside, she countered, from someone with administrative privileges who knew how to cover their tracks. The implication hung between them. Richard Blake, as CFO, had access to nearly every system in the company: financial, operational, security. If he had been working with these criminals all along, the potential damage was incalculable. We need to move carefully, Detective Reeves continued. If Mr. Blake realizes he's under investigation, he could destroy evidence or alert his associates, who might then cover their tracks by eliminating witnesses, Marcus said, the reality of the situation sinking in, including Victoria, and possibly others. The detective's expression remained professional, but her meaning was clear. Marcus and his mother could also be targets. "What do you need from me?" Marcus asked. "Access to your company's security systems and financial records through channels Mr. Blake wouldn't monitor. And your continued discretion. Mr. Blake should believe you're focused entirely on your mother's recovery and your wife's betrayal, not on any potential corporate malfeasance." Marcus nodded slowly. "I can arrange the access through our head of cybersecurity. She reports directly to me, not through Richard. As for discretion," he managed a grim smile, "I've just discovered my wife has been laundering money and attacked my mother for financial gain. Acting devastated and distracted won't be difficult." "Good." Detective Reeves gathered the photographs, returning them to her folder. "There's one more thing. Your wife is still requesting to see you. Given what we now know, it might be valuable to hear what she has to say directly." Marcus hesitated. The thought of facing Victoria, of looking into the eyes of the woman who had betrayed him so completely, filled him with a mixture of dread and rage. But his mother's words echoed in his mind. "You need answers, Marcus. Real ones." "I'll see her," he decided, "this afternoon after I've checked on some things at the company. I'll make the arrangements." The detective stood to leave, then paused. "Mr. Williams, I should warn you. Your wife seems genuinely afraid, not just of legal consequences, but of physical harm. Whatever is happening here goes beyond financial crimes and domestic violence. These are dangerous people with significant resources." "I understand," Marcus replied. "I'll take appropriate precautions." After Detective Reeves left, Marcus returned to his mother's room to find her awake, Maria helping her with a small breakfast. Despite the bandages and the hospital gown, Eleanor maintained her dignity, sitting as upright as her injuries allowed, her silver hair neatly combed. "There he is," she said, spotting Marcus in the doorway. "Come tell me you've eaten something besides hospital vending machine food." Marcus smiled despite himself. Even now in her condition, his mother's first concern was for him. "I had coffee," he offered. "Coffee isn't food," Eleanor replied with motherly disapproval. "Maria, would you please find my son something substantial to eat before he wastes away?" "Mom, I'm fine." "Humor an old woman with second-degree burns," Eleanor interrupted firmly. "Let me feel useful." Marcus acquiesced, and Maria slipped out with a promise to return with proper food. Once they were alone, Eleanor's expression grew serious. "That was the detective I saw you talking to. What did she say?" Marcus hesitated, not wanting to burden his mother with more troubles, but Eleanor had always valued honesty above comfort. "Victoria's cooperating with the investigation," he said, sitting beside the bed. "She's confirmed the money laundering through her gallery and implicated Richard as the primary connection to the criminals involved." Eleanor nodded, unsurprised. "The USB drive in the painting will confirm that. Have you retrieved it yet?" "Not yet. I'm heading to the house after I leave here." Marcus leaned forward, elbows on his knees. The detective also found evidence that these people may have had access to Williams Tech's systems, probably through Richard. "A security breach," Eleanor said, understanding immediately, "in a company that provides security to others. If it becomes public, the damage to Williams Tech would be catastrophic. Our entire business is built on trust." Marcus ran a hand through his hair. "Stocks would plummet. Clients would abandon us. Thousands of people could lose their jobs." "Including Richard Blake," Eleanor observed, "which gives him even more reason to cover his tracks." "I'm meeting with our head of cybersecurity this afternoon. If there's a breach, Maya will find it." Marcus checked his watch. "I should go. I need to get to the house, retrieve the USB drive, and then head to the office." "And then to see Victoria," Eleanor added quietly. Marcus looked up, surprised. "How did you know?" "Because I know you," his mother replied simply, "and because it's what you need to do. I'm not sure I can look at her without seeing what she did to you." "Then see it," Eleanor said firmly. "See the truth of who she became, not the illusion of who you thought she was. But also listen, Marky. Behind her lies There may be truths you need to hear." Marcus nodded, then leaned forward to kiss his mother's cheek. "The security detail will remain outside your door. Don't hesitate to call if you need anything, and I mean anything, even if it's just company." "I'll be fine," Eleanor assured him. "Maria is here, and the doctors say I'm stable. Go do what you need to do. Just remember. Justice, not revenge," Marcus finished for her. "I remember." The Williams mansion felt like a different place when Marcus arrived an hour later. Yellow police tape cordoned off the east wing where the assault had occurred. 2 uniformed officers stood guard at the entrance, checking his ID before allowing him to enter his own home. Inside, the house was eerily silent. The household staff had been given leave until further notice. The smart home system, which usually adjusted lighting and temperature automatically, had been temporarily disabled during the police search, leaving the massive space feeling hollow and abandoned. Marcus made his way directly to his office, where the painting hung exactly as it always had, a large abstract composition of blues and grays that he had never particularly appreciated, but that Victoria had insisted complemented the room's design. Now, looking at it with new eyes, he noticed details he'd overlooked before, how the frame was disproportionately thick for the canvas size, how it hung slightly lower than the other artwork in the room. Carefully, he lifted the painting from the wall and set it on his desk. The frame was heavy, made of solid wood painted a matte charcoal gray. He examined the edges and corners, looking for any indication of a hidden compartment. Nothing was immediately visible, but when he ran his fingers along the bottom edge, he felt a slight indentation near one corner. Pressing gently, he heard a soft click as a small panel in the frame popped open, revealing a hollow space containing a black USB drive no larger than his thumbnail. Marcus removed it carefully, aware that it might be the key not just to understanding his wife's betrayal, but to saving his company from a potentially devastating security breach. He pocketed the drive and returned the painting to the wall, making sure it hung exactly as before. If Richard or anyone else connected to this conspiracy visited the house, Marcus wanted no indication that he had discovered Victoria's insurance policy. Back in his car, he called Maya Patel, Williams Tech's head of cybersecurity, a brilliant programmer he'd hired away from the NSA 5 years earlier. "Maya, I need to see you immediately, not at the office. Meet me at Lookout Point Cafe in 20 minutes. Come alone and don't tell anyone where you're going." "Marcus," Maya sounded concerned. "What's happening? I've heard about your mother. Is she—" "She'll recover," Marcus interrupted, "but this is about something else, something potentially serious for the company. I'll explain when I see you. And Maya, don't use company devices for anything related to this meeting. Bring your personal laptop if you have it." "Now you're scaring me," she replied, her usual confidence faltering. "Good," Marcus said grimly. "A little fear might keep us all safe right now." Lookout Point Cafe sat on a bluff overlooking the Atlantic, far enough from both Marcus's home and Williams Tech headquarters to minimize the chance of accidental encounters. At this hour, between breakfast and lunch, the outdoor patio was nearly empty, offering privacy along with spectacular ocean views. Maya arrived precisely on time, a slim woman in her early 30s with sharp eyes and a perpetually serious expression that belied her dry sense of humor. Today, however, there was no humor in her face as she slid into the seat across from Marcus, a battered personal laptop tucked under her arm. "I came straight from home," she said without preamble, "and I took an Uber instead of my car. Want to tell me why we're being so cloak and dagger?" "I have reason to believe Williams Tech's security has been compromised," Marcus replied quietly. "By someone with internal access." Maya's expression didn't change, but her posture straightened. "How confident are you about this?" "Confident enough to meet you here instead of at the office." Marcus extracted the USB drive from his pocket and placed it on the table between them. "This may contain evidence of the breach, along with proof of who's responsible. And you don't want to plug this into any company systems because I believe the breach originated with Richard Blake," Marcus finished, watching her reaction carefully. To her credit, Maya didn't immediately dismiss the accusation against the CFO. Instead, she frowned thoughtfully. "That would explain a few anomalies I've noticed in the past year. Access logs with timestamps that don't align with Richard's known schedule. Security protocol modifications that weren't properly documented." "You suspected something?" Marcus asked, a surge of anger rising. Why didn't you bring it to me? Because they were minor discrepancies, not clear violations, Maya replied calmly. And because Richard has always had broad administrative privileges, approved by you, I might add. Without concrete evidence of misuse, it would have been irresponsible to make accusations against a C-suite executive. Marcus nodded, acknowledging the point. Well, now we may have that evidence. Can you check the contents of this drive without connecting to any Williams Tech systems? Of course. Maya opened her laptop, an older model deliberately kept disconnected from company networks for her personal projects. If there's a breach, how widespread do you think it is? I don't know, Marcus admitted, but the potential source has connections to Eastern European cybercriminals, and given Richard's access level, it could be comprehensive, Maya concluded, her expression growing more serious. If he's been feeding information to these people, they could have access to client encryption keys, security protocols, perhaps even our proprietary algorithms. The implications were staggering. Williams Tech provided security systems for government agencies, financial institutions, and critical infrastructure around the world. A breach at this level wouldn't just damage the company, it could compromise national security. Maya inserted the USB drive into her laptop and began typing rapidly, her face illuminated by the screen's blue glow. It's encrypted, she said after a moment. Sophisticated too, not something an amateur would use. Can you break it? Given enough time, maybe, but there might be a faster way. She looked up at Marcus. What do you know about this drive's origin? Any possible passwords or key phrases? Marcus considered the question. It belonged to my wife. She hid it as an insurance policy against the people she was working with. The encryption might be related to something personal, something only she would know. Maya nodded. Then I suggest you try a few likely passwords. Sometimes the most sophisticated security is undermined by the most basic human tendency to choose meaningful passwords. Marcus took the laptop and stared at the password prompt. What would Victoria have chosen? Their anniversary date? Too obvious. Her gallery's name? Too professional. Then he remembered something, a conversation from early in their relationship, before the marriage, before the mansion, when they had still been sharing their histories and dreams. Everyone has a sanctuary phrase, Victoria had told him one night as they lay in bed, rain pattering against the windows of her loft apartment. A combination of words that feels like coming home. What's yours? He'd asked. She'd smiled, trailing her fingers along his chest. Emerald shadows dancing. It's what my grandmother used to say when I was little, living by the ocean in Maine. She said my eyes were the color of emeralds, and whenever I was sad, she'd take me to watch the shadows of trees dancing on the water. Marcus hadn't thought of that conversation in years, but now, staring at the password prompt, he typed, "Emerald shadows, dancing." The screen flickered and suddenly folders appeared, dozens of them, meticulously organized with names like financial transactions, communication records, and Williams Tech security. "I'm in," Marcus said softly, looking up at Maya. She used a phrase from her childhood, something I'd forgotten until now. Maya's expression softened momentarily. Sometimes the people who hurt us most still have moments of genuine humanity. It's what makes betrayal so painful. Then her professional demeanor returned. "Let me see what we're dealing with." She took the laptop back and began navigating through the folders with practiced efficiency. As she worked, her expression grew increasingly grim. "This is worse than I thought," she said finally, turning the screen so Marcus could see. "These are backdoor access protocols to our security framework, created by Richard nearly 2 years ago. With these, someone could monitor all internal communications, access client encryption keys, even modify security parameters without triggering alerts." Marcus stared at the technical specifications, the full weight of the betrayal sinking in. "Can you tell if these have been actively used?" "Not from these files alone," Maya replied, "but they're dated 18 months ago and there have been multiple revisions. I'd say it's almost certain they've been operational." "How do we shut them down without alerting Richard?" Maya thought for a moment. "We'll need to implement a shadow security protocol, one that appears normal to anyone using the existing system, but actually routes all access attempts through a new monitoring framework. It would let us see exactly who's using these backdoors and what they're accessing, while simultaneously preparing a complete security overhaul. How quickly can you set that up? With a small team of people I personally trust? 48 hours, maybe less? She closed the laptop, her expression resolute. But Marcus, we need to consider the possibility that the damage is already done. These people may already have what they wanted from our systems. Which is what? Based on what I've seen here, client encryption keys, security vulnerabilities, and proprietary algorithms would be the high-value targets. Maya's voice was grim. With those, they could potentially bypass security at any institution using our systems, or worse, sell zero-day exploits to the highest bidder. The implications were staggering. Williams Tech's client list included central banks, defense contractors, and critical infrastructure providers around the world. If their security had been compromised. We need to contain this, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the panic building inside him. Select your team, people you trust implicitly. Use the emergency protocols we developed for the Pentagon project. Full compartmentalization, no digital communication about what you're doing. Maya nodded. And Richard? For now, business as usual. I don't want him suspicious until we've secured our systems and gathered enough evidence for authorities. Marcus checked his watch. I have to go. I'm meeting Victoria at the detention center in an hour. Your wife, Maya said carefully. How involved do you think she was in all this? I don't know, Marcus admitted, but I intend to find out. The Metropolitan Detention Center was a stark concrete building in downtown Manhattan, its institutional grimness a jarring contrast to the luxury Victoria had grown accustomed to. Marcus followed a series of guards through security checkpoints and sterile hallways until he reached a private visitation room, a concession to his status and the high-profile nature of the case. He waited, mentally preparing himself for the confrontation to come. What would he see when he looked at Victoria, the sophisticated woman he had married, the cold-eyed stranger who had poured boiling water on his mother? Or something else entirely? Perhaps the frightened person Detective Reeves had described? The door opened, and Victoria entered, escorted by a female guard. She wore an orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on her frame, her blonde hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face devoid of makeup. Without her usual polished appearance, she looked younger, more vulnerable. And yet, as their eyes met, Marcus saw a calculation there that suggested the vulnerability might be as carefully constructed as everything else about her. You came, she said softly, as the guard directed her to sit across from him. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't, Marcus replied honestly. After what you did to my mother, I wasn't sure I could look at you without wanting to hurt me, Victoria finished when he trailed off. I would understand if you did. That's not who I am. No, she agreed, something like genuine regret crossing her features. It's never been who you are. That's why I loved you. Loved? Marcus noted the past tense. At least you're not pretending anymore. Victoria's gaze dropped to her hands, which lay folded on the table between them. Her wedding ring had been removed, held with her personal effects, he supposed. I did love you, Marcus, she said quietly. Not from the beginning, but later. Yes, that part wasn't a lie. Just everything else. Not everything. She looked up, meeting his eyes directly. My background in art is real. My gallery started as a legitimate business. Even my feelings for you, they became real over time. How comforting, Marcus said coldly. So when exactly did you decide to start laundering money through your gallery? Before or after you developed real feelings for me? Victoria winced slightly at his tone. I never intended for the gallery to become what it did. Richard approached me about 18 months after we were married. He said he had clients, wealthy individuals with privacy concerns, who wanted to invest in art. The commissions would be significant. It seemed like a way to finally make the gallery profitable on its own, not dependent on your support. Richard came to you, Marcus clarified, not the other way around. Yes, he'd already been working with these people for some time, helping them move money through various channels. The gallery was just a new opportunity. Victoria leaned forward slightly. I didn't know at first what was really happening. By the time I understood, I was already implicated. And then you started skimming, Marcus finished, remembering what Thomas had told him. taking a larger cut than you were supposed to. Victoria nodded, a flash of defiance crossing her features. The gallery was struggling. Legitimate sales weren't covering expenses. These people were making millions using my business as a front. Why shouldn't I have taken more? Because stealing from criminals tends to have unpleasant consequences, Marcus replied dryly. Consequences like being threatened until you're desperate enough to attack an elderly woman for her company shares. Shame flickered across Victoria's face, quickly replaced by defensive anger. I never meant to actually hurt her. It was supposed to be a threat, a scare tactic. Things escalated. You poured boiling water on my mother, Marcus said, his voice dangerously quiet. Water so hot it caused second-degree burns. How exactly did you think that would end? I wasn't thinking clearly, Victoria admitted. I was desperate. Zharkov had given me a deadline, $3 million by the end of the month, or his people would take compensation from me directly. She shuddered slightly. You don't know what these people are capable of, Marcus. The things they've done to others who crossed them. So instead of coming to me, your husband, a billionaire who could easily have covered that amount, you decided to torture my mother into signing over her shares. I couldn't come to you, Victoria said, frustration edging her voice, because it wasn't just about the money. It was about what they wanted from Williams Tech, what they've been taking all along through Richard's access. Marcus leaned forward. And what exactly is that? Victoria hesitated, glancing toward the guard who stood impassively by the door. I don't know all the technical details, but I know it's about your security systems, specifically the ones used by financial institutions and government agencies. Richard has been feeding them access protocols, encryption keys, something called zero-day vulnerabilities. This confirmed what Maya had already found on the USB drive. For how long? At least 2 years, maybe longer. Victoria lowered her voice further. Marcus, these aren't just ordinary criminals. They're state-sponsored, working for foreign intelligence services. The money laundering is just a side operation to fund their other activities. Marcus felt his blood run cold. If she was telling the truth, this wasn't simply corporate espionage or financial crime. It was international espionage with potential national security implications. Why are you telling me this now? He asked. Why not when it started? Why not before it reached the point of attacking my mother? Because I was afraid, Victoria admitted, her composure cracking slightly. Afraid of these people, afraid of losing you, afraid of going to prison. But mostly, she took a deep breath, mostly afraid of admitting to myself what I'd become, how far I'd fallen from the person I wanted to be. Marcus studied her face, searching for truth amid the calculated vulnerability. And the USB drive? Your insurance policy? Surprise flickered in Victoria's eyes. You found it. My mother found it weeks ago, Marcus corrected. She copied the files but left it in place, waiting until she had the full picture before coming to me. Clever woman, Victoria murmured, something like genuine admiration in her voice. I underestimated her. That seems to be a pattern with the Williams family. The drive contains evidence against Richard, Marcus continued. Financial transactions, communication records, security breach documentation. Why collect all that if you were working together? Because we weren't working together, not really. Victoria's expression hardened. Richard brought me into this, used my gallery, made me complicit. But he was always serving his own interests. I gathered that evidence to protect myself if things went wrong, to prove I wasn't the mastermind. And now you're using it to negotiate with prosecutors, Marcus concluded. Wouldn't you? Victoria asked simply. I've admitted what I did to your mother. I'll serve time for that. I deserve to. But I won't take the fall for Richard's espionage operation. Marcus sat back, processing everything she'd said. Parts of her story aligned with the evidence he'd seen on the USB drive and with what Detective Reeves had shared. But could he trust anything from a woman who had deceived him so thoroughly for years? There's something else you should know, Victoria said after a moment of silence. Something not on the drive. What? Richard isn't working alone inside Williams Tech. He has at least one other accomplice, someone with access to your most secure systems, the ones even Richard can't reach. Marcus frowned. Who? I don't know a name, but I overheard Richard talking about a secondary asset with high-level clearance, someone he referred to as the architect. The designation sent a chill through Marcus. At Williams Tech, only a handful of people were informally called architects. The core development team who had been with the company from its earliest days, who had designed the foundational security protocols upon which everything else was built. "When did you hear this?" he asked. "About 6 months ago. Richard was on the phone in his home office. He didn't know I was in the house. I'd come to drop off some documentation he needed." Victoria leaned forward intently. "Marcus, you need to be careful. If there's another insider, especially one with deep technical access—" "I understand the implications," Marcus interrupted. He stood, signaling the guard that the visit was ending. "Is there anything else I should know?" Victoria hesitated, then nodded. "Watch Thomas. My brother isn't as uninvolved as he pretends to be." Marcus froze. "What are you saying?" "Just that Tom has always been good at playing both sides. He presents himself as the honest one, the moral one, but—" She shrugged. "Family patterns run deep, and we Chambers siblings learned survival in ways you Williams Tech billionaires never had to." Before Marcus could respond to this unexpected revelation, the guard approached to escort Victoria back to her cell. She stood, but before turning to leave, she looked at Marcus one last time. Her emerald eyes filled with something that might have been regret or might have been simply another calculated performance. "For what it's worth," she said softly, "I am sorry about your mother. Whatever else was false between us, my remorse for that is genuine." Marcus watched her go, his mind racing with everything he'd learned and everything he still didn't know. The conspiracy reached deeper than he'd imagined, potentially involving not just Richard, but one of his core architects, and possibly even Thomas, the one person he'd still been tentatively trusting. As he left the detention center and stepped into the afternoon sunlight, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "Found something. Emergency protocol activated. Meet at secure location Alpha." The storm wasn't subsiding. It was intensifying, threatening to engulf not just his personal life, but potentially his entire company and beyond. And somewhere at the center of it all remained the question that had been haunting him since he first saw Victoria holding that kettle. How had he, a man whose fortune was built on seeing patterns others missed, been so blind to the danger in his own home? The answer, he suspected, lay in the most human of vulnerabilities, the desperate desire to believe that love, at least, was genuine in a world increasingly defined by calculation and self-interest. It was a vulnerability he could no longer afford, not with so much at stake. Marcus Williams, the trusting husband and devoted son, receded with each step away from the detention center. In his place emerged someone colder, more focused, more determined, a man who would do whatever it took to protect what mattered, no matter the cost. Justice, not revenge, his mother had said. But as Marcus drove toward the secure meeting location, he wondered if the two could truly be separated when the stakes were this high and the betrayals cut this deep. If you've ever been betrayed by someone close to you, this story must touch your heart. Comment "Stay strong" to show support for those dealing with betrayal. Has anyone ever tried to come between you and your mother? Share your experience below. Sometimes the people we think we know best are the ones hiding the darkest secrets. Have you ever discovered someone in your life wasn't who they claimed to be? Secure location. Alpha was not an office building or a government facility, but a modest cabin nestled in the woods of upstate New York, about an hour's drive from Manhattan. Marcus had purchased it through an anonymous LLC 5 years earlier, when Williams Tech's rapid growth had started attracting unwanted attention from both competitors and hackers. The property didn't appear in any company records, wasn't connected to any Williams Tech systems, and was known only to a handful of his most trusted executives, or so he had believed until today. Marcus parked his car in the small clearing beside the cabin and sat for a moment, surveying the surroundings. The afternoon sun filtered through towering pine trees, casting dappled shadows across the wooden structure. A blue sedan, Maya's personal vehicle, was already parked nearby. No other cars were visible, but Marcus remained cautious, scanning the tree line for any sign of surveillance. His phone vibrated with a text from Maya. "Inside. Secure. Two-person authentication required." This was part of their emergency protocol, a system developed for worst-case scenarios involving company security. Marcus approached the cabin and knocked in a specific pattern: 3 quick taps, pause, 2 slow taps. Through the door, Maya's voice called out, "Verification phrase?" "Algorithms outlive empires," Marcus responded with the predetermined passphrase. The door opened to reveal Maya, tension evident in her usually composed features. "We're clear," she said, stepping aside to let him enter. "I've swept for surveillance devices. Nothing found." Inside, the cabin was spartanly furnished: a table and chairs, a small kitchenette, a couch that converted to a bed. What distinguished it were the technology elements carefully integrated into the rustic setting: a secure server rack disguised as a wood stove, satellite internet connections hidden in what appeared to be ordinary roof vents, and a sophisticated security system controlled by inconspicuous panels that resembled light switches. Maya had set up her equipment on the wooden table: her personal laptop, several external hard drives, and paper notebooks filled with handwritten code and diagrams. Old-school security, impossible to hack remotely. "What did you find?" Marcus asked, settling into a chair across from her. "3 things, each worse than the last." Maya's fingers flew across her keyboard, bringing up a series of files from the USB drive. "First, the security breach is more extensive than we initially thought. Richard didn't just create backdoor access points, he systematically weakened encryption protocols for specific clients." "Which clients?" Marcus asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Central banks, defense contractors, critical infrastructure operators." Maya pulled up a list that made Marcus's stomach sink. "Particularly those serving U.S. interests or those of our closest allies." "Targeted espionage," Marcus concluded, "not random financial crime." "Exactly. This wasn't about making money, though they certainly did that too. It was about creating vulnerabilities in high-value targets." Maya switched to another file. "Second, I've identified a pattern in the system access logs that confirms your wife's claim about another insider, someone she called the architect. You know who it is?" "I have a strong suspicion, based on access patterns and technical signatures." Maya's expression was grave. "The infiltration points show characteristics consistent with Alan Peterson's coding style." Marcus felt as if he'd been punched. Alan Peterson was not just one of Williams Tech's original architects. He had been Marcus's roommate at MIT, his coding partner during the company's garage days, the best man at his wedding to Victoria. If Alan was involved— "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be without direct evidence," Maya replied. "The timestamps of suspicious access align with Alan's work schedule. The code modifications bear his trademark efficiency. And, most damning, when I ran a correlation analysis of authorized users against breach incidents, his credentials showed a 93% match." Marcus closed his eyes briefly, absorbing this new betrayal. Alan, who had been there from the beginning. Alan, who knew every line of core code in their systems because he'd helped write it. Alan, whose friendship had predated even Richard's. "What's the third thing?" he asked, opening his eyes to face whatever came next. Maya hesitated, then turned her laptop to face him directly. "This isn't from the USB drive. It's from my own investigation into our systems over the past 24 hours." The screen displayed what appeared to be a financial ledger. Rows of transactions, dates, account numbers. But as Marcus studied it more closely, he realized these weren't ordinary business transactions. They were payments, substantial ones, flowing from various shell companies into accounts held by both Richard Blake and Alan Peterson. And alongside these, smaller but still significant sums to another recipient, Thomas Chambers. "Victoria's brother," Marcus said quietly. "She warned me about him, but I didn't want to believe it." "He appears to have played a smaller role," Maya acknowledged, "primarily as an intermediary rather than an active participant in the technical breaches, but he was definitely on their payroll." Marcus stood and paced the small cabin, struggling to process the scope of the conspiracy. Everyone he had trusted, his CFO, his friend, his brother-in-law, his wife, each of them compromised, each betraying him in their own way. "When did it start?" he asked finally. "How long has this been happening?" "Based on the earliest transaction records, approximately 3 years ago." Maya's voice was gentle, recognizing the personal devastation behind the technical questions. around the time Williams Tech secured its first major government contracts. Before I even met Victoria, Marcus noted, a bitter laugh escaping him. So at least my marriage wasn't built entirely on deception. Just mostly. Maya said nothing, allowing him space to process. After a moment, Marcus stopped pacing and faced her directly. You said you activated the emergency protocol. What measures have you already taken? I've assembled a skeleton crew of 3 analysts I personally vetted, people who have no connection to Richard or Alan. We've initiated a shadow monitoring system that tracks all access to our core security frameworks without alerting the primary systems. And what has it shown so far? Active infiltration attempts from external sources utilizing the backdoors Richard created. Maya pulled up a real-time display showing attempted access points blinking across a global map. They're getting nervous, increasing their activity significantly in the past 12 hours. They know we're onto them, Marcus concluded. Victoria's arrest must have triggered contingency plans. It's worse than that, Maya said, switching to another screen. Look at this spike in access attempts using Alan's credentials. He's been downloading massive data packets, encryption keys, client vulnerability assessments, security bypass protocols. He's grabbing everything he can before the window closes, Marcus realized. But why now? Why not wait until things cool down? Because of this. Maya opened one final file, an internal memo from Williams Tech's legal department, dated yesterday. While you were at the hospital with your mother, the board called an emergency meeting. They've scheduled a comprehensive security audit to begin tomorrow morning. Standard procedure, given the potential PR implications of your wife's arrest. Marcus frowned. I wasn't notified. Richard sent the communication as acting CEO in your absence, Maya explained, technically following protocol for emergency situations, while simultaneously alerting his co-conspirators that time was running out. Marcus concluded. How much damage can they do in the next 24 hours? Maya's expression was grim. With Alan's access level and the backdoors already established, they could compromise every system we've secured for the past 5 years. Government databases, banking networks, power grid controls, all potentially vulnerable. Marcus took a deep breath, centering himself. This was no longer just about personal betrayal or even corporate espionage. It was about national security, about the safety and stability of critical infrastructure worldwide. We need to shut them down, he said with quiet determination. Not just monitor, actively block their access and secure our systems. That would alert them immediately, Maya cautioned. At this point, that's a risk we have to take. Marcus leaned over the table, studying the access maps. How quickly can you implement a complete system lockdown? With my team, 4 hours for basic protection, 24 to fully secure everything. Maya frowned. But Marcus, a lockdown of this scale would effectively freeze all Williams Tech operations globally. Clients would notice immediately. Markets would react. The company could lose billions in value overnight. Better billions in market value than critical infrastructure security, Marcus replied. And if we move quickly enough, we might be able to contain the damage to reputation as well. He straightened, decision made. Implement the lockdown protocol. Start with the most critical systems first. Anything connected to defense or infrastructure. I'll handle the fallout with the board and clients. What about Richard and Alan? Maya asked. If we lock them out, they'll know we're onto them. Let them know, Marcus said, a cold anger settling in his voice. In fact, I'm counting on it. Maya raised an eyebrow, questioning. If they realize their access is compromised, they'll have to move quickly, make mistakes, reveal connections, possibly even attempt to flee. Marcus pulled out his phone. Which is why I'm calling Detective Reeves right now to arrange surveillance on both of them. Once they react to the lockdown, we'll have them on criminal attempt, not just past actions. As Marcus made the call, arranging for police surveillance of both Richard and Alan, Maya began the complex process of initiating a system-wide security lockdown. The cabin hummed with tension and purpose, 2 people working to contain a breach that threatened far more than just a company's reputation. When Marcus finished his call, his phone immediately rang again. The hospital. A cold dread washed through him as he answered. Mr. Williams, came the urgent voice of Maria. You need to return to the hospital immediately. A man claiming to be from your company's legal department tried to get into your mother's room. Security stopped him, but— Was it Richard Blake? Marcus asked, already moving toward the door. Yes, that's the name. The guards recognized him from your approved visitor list, but something seemed off about his story. When they called to verify with your office, he became agitated and left. I'm on my way, Marcus said. No one gets in to see my mother except you and the medical staff. Absolutely no one. And call Detective Reeves. Her number should be with security. Ending the call, he turned to Maya. Richard tried to get to my mother. I have to go. Go, Maya nodded, her expression hardening. I'll manage things here and coordinate with law enforcement. The lockdown will be in place within the hour. As Marcus sped back toward Manhattan, his mind raced with horrible possibilities. Why would Richard risk approaching Eleanor directly? What was so important that he would take such a desperate chance? The answer hit him with chilling clarity. Eleanor was a witness. Unlike Victoria, who was already in custody, Eleanor was accessible, vulnerable, and she had evidence that could destroy everything Richard had built. By the time Marcus reached the hospital, the security presence had visibly increased. Police officers stood at entrances and near elevators. As he rushed to Eleanor's floor, Detective Reeves met him in the hallway. We've secured the area, she said without preamble. Your mother is safe, though understandably shaken. Blake left before officers could apprehend him, but we've put out an APB and have units watching his home and office. Thank you, Marcus said, relief washing through him. Have you posted additional officers? 2 inside the room with her, 2 more at the entrance to the ward. No one gets near her without triple verification. What about Alan Peterson? That's actually why I was waiting for you, Detective Reeves replied, her voice turning grimmer. Peterson never showed up at his office today. His wife says he called about an hour ago, told her he had to go out of town on emergency business for a few days, took nothing but a laptop and a small bag. He's running, Marcus realized. Both of them are. Appears that way. We've flagged their passports and alerted TSA, but if they have false documentation— They do, Marcus said with certainty, or at least access to it through their associates. Check private airfields and charter services. These aren't men who fly commercial when they're in a hurry. Inside Eleanor's room, Marcus found his mother sitting up in bed, looking remarkably composed despite the chaos surrounding her. When she saw him, relief softened her features. There's my son, she said, reaching for his hand as he approached the bed, always rushing into the storm instead of away from it. Are you all right? Marcus asked, taking her hand carefully. Did Richard say anything to you before security stopped him? He didn't get in the room, Eleanor assured him, but I saw his face through the door window. He looked desperate, not like the Richard I've known all these years. Marcus nodded grimly. He has good reason to be desperate. We've found evidence linking him to an international espionage operation. He's been selling access to Williams Tech security systems to foreign agents. Eleanor didn't look surprised, which struck Marcus as odd. You already knew, he said, studying her face. I suspected, she corrected. The evidence on Victoria's USB drive pointed that way, but I wasn't certain of the scale. She paused, something like regret crossing her features. What I didn't tell you yesterday is that there was another set of financial records on that drive. Personal ones. Marcus frowned. What kind of personal records? Eleanor sighed softly. Transactions from my personal account to Victoria's private account. Monthly transfers dating back almost a year. Marcus stared at her, struggling to comprehend what she was saying. You were giving Victoria money? Why? Because she asked for help, Eleanor said simply. 6 months after I moved into your home, she came to me in private, said the gallery was struggling, that she was too proud to ask you for more money when you'd already been so generous. She was afraid of appearing to be a failure. So you gave her money without telling me. Marcus couldn't hide his disbelief. At first, it was just a loan. Then, as I got to know her better, I began to see something in her that reminded me of myself at her age, that desperate determination not to fail, to prove herself worthy. Eleanor's eyes held a distant sadness. I recognized the look of someone drowning, but too proud to call for help. Mom, she was laundering money for criminals. I didn't know that then, Eleanor countered. I only knew she was struggling, and that she reminded me of myself years ago, trying to build something of her own while living in the shadow of someone successful. Marcus stood and paced the small hospital room, trying to reconcile this new information with everything else he'd learned. How much did you give her? About 800,000 over the past year. Marcus stopped pacing, stunned by the amount. That's a significant portion of your personal savings. Money is just money, Eleanor said with the pragmatism of someone who had lived without it for most of her life. I thought I was helping her build something legitimate, something she could be proud of. When did you realize the truth? Only recently, when I found the USB drive. I saw my transfers listed alongside much larger sums from accounts with Russian and Chinese designations. Eleanor's expression hardened slightly. That's when I began to understand that my money wasn't going into the gallery at all. It was helping cover the shortfall from what Victoria was skimming from her criminal partners. Marcus sank into the chair beside the bed, processing this revelation. Did she know you knew? I confronted her 3 days before your return, Eleanor admitted, not with accusations but with concern. I told her I'd seen evidence of suspicious financial activity and wanted to help her get out of whatever trouble she was in. And how did she respond? She denied everything, said I was confused, imagining things. Eleanor shook her head sadly, but I could see the panic in her eyes. She knew I'd discovered her secret and that I might tell you. That's why she came after you with the kettle, Marcus realized, not just for the company shares, but because you knew about her connection to these criminals. Yes, Eleanor confirmed, though I believe the desperation about the shares was real too. From what I've pieced together, she needed to repay $3 million she'd skimmed, and your return was the deadline. My shares were her last resort. Marcus studied his mother, seeing her in a new light. Even while bedridden with burns inflicted by Victoria, she spoke about her daughter-in-law with a complex mixture of disappointment and compassion that few would be capable of. Why didn't you tell me this yesterday? He asked. Because I needed you focused on the bigger threat, Richard and the company breach. And because, Eleanor hesitated, because I felt partially responsible. If I'd come to you sooner with my suspicions instead of trying to help Victoria myself, perhaps none of this would have happened. Before Marcus could respond, his phone buzzed with an urgent message from Maya. Lockdown complete. Detected immediate attempts to breach. Blake and Peterson both trying to access core systems remotely. Law enforcement has been notified of their locations. They've made their move, Marcus said, showing Eleanor the message. Now we wait for the police to pick them up. Eleanor nodded, then said something that caught Marcus entirely off guard. When they arrest Victoria's brother Thomas, be gentle with him. Marcus stared at her. You knew about him too? He came to see me about a month ago when you were in California. He was torn up about his sister's involvement, wanted to know if I had any influence over her. Eleanor smiled faintly. He's not as deeply involved as he appears. He's been feeding information to the FBI for the past 3 months, trying to protect his sister while stopping the larger operation. Thomas is an informant? Marcus couldn't hide his shock, but Maya found payments to him from the same accounts that paid Richard and Alan. Cover payments to maintain his appearance as part of the operation. Detective Reeves confirmed it for me this morning before you arrived. Eleanor's eyes crinkled slightly. You're not the only one who's been busy making calls today, Marky. Marcus shook his head in amazement. His mother, even confined to a hospital bed with burn injuries, was still 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Still protecting those she cared about, still working to set things right. I've underestimated you my entire life, haven't I? He said with a mixture of admiration and chagrin. Most people do, Eleanor replied with a small smile. It's actually quite useful. People reveal more when they think you don't fully understand what's happening. Marcus's phone rang again. Detective Reeves. He answered immediately, putting it on speaker. We've got them, came her voice, triumphant but measured. Blake was apprehended attempting to board a private jet at Teterboro. Peterson was caught at his lake house upstate, destroying documents. Both are in custody. The relief that swept through Marcus was so profound, he had to sit down. And the evidence? Rock solid. They were caught red-handed trying to access your systems after being locked out. Combined with the financial records and the USB drive, we have more than enough for federal charges of corporate espionage and potentially treason. After the call ended, Marcus sat in silence beside his mother's bed. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the hospital room floor. The immediate danger had passed. The conspirators were in custody. The company's systems had been secured, yet the emotional devastation remained, the shattered trust, the broken relationships, the realization that nothing had been quite what it seemed. Marcus felt hollowed out, emptied of the certainty that had always guided his life. "What happens now?" he asked softly, more to himself than to Eleanor. His mother reached for his hand, her touch gentle despite her bandages. "Now you rebuild, not just the company, but yourself. You learn from this not to stop trusting, but to trust with wisdom rather than blind faith." "And Victoria?" Marcus couldn't keep the edge from his voice. "Am I supposed to forgive her too, after what she did to you?" "Forgiveness isn't about her," Eleanor said firmly. "It's about freeing yourself from the weight of anger. It doesn't mean forgetting or excusing. It means refusing to let hatred consume you." She shifted slightly, wincing as the movement pulled at her burns. "I've been keeping a ledger my entire life, Marky. Not just of money, but of what truly matters. Love given and received, kindnesses extended, growth achieved through hardship." Marcus looked at his mother, this woman who had scrubbed floors and served diners to put him through college, who had recognized the warning signs he had missed, who could speak with compassion about the woman who had burned her with boiling water. "And how does Victoria's attack balance in that ledger?" he asked. "It doesn't," Eleanor replied simply. "But neither does it erase the genuine love I believe she came to feel for you. Neither does it negate the good she might still do by cooperating fully with authorities. The ledger of love is complex, Marky. It doesn't reduce to simple addition and subtraction." As the hospital room darkened with the approaching night, Marcus sat with his mother, contemplating the wisdom of a woman who had always seen more clearly than anyone gave her credit for. The road ahead would be difficult, rebuilding his company, testifying against people he had once trusted, finding a way forward that didn't harden him against the very connections that made life worthwhile. But in this moment, sitting beside the woman who had sacrificed everything for him, who had shown him what true strength looked like, Marcus felt something unexpected stir within him. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the first tentative step toward it, a recognition that even in the darkest betrayal, there remained the possibility of redemption. Not for Victoria, perhaps, or Richard, or Alan, but for himself, for the man he still wanted to be. The kettle had boiled over, scalding everything it touched, but in that scalding moment, truths had been revealed that might otherwise have remained hidden forever. And in that painful revelation lay the seeds of a deeper, more authentic life, one built not on the illusions of wealth and status, but on the enduring foundation of a mother's wisdom and a son's determination to honor it. This story shows that sometimes the people we hurt most are the ones who were quietly helping us all along. Tag someone who has shown you unexpected kindness when you needed it most. Are you Team Eleanor or Team Marcus in how to handle betrayal? Let us know in the comments below. What would you do if you discovered someone you loved had been deceiving you? Share your thoughts as we continue to the resolution of this powerful true story. The trial of Richard Blake and Alan Peterson dominated financial headlines for months. The details that emerged painted a picture of betrayal and espionage, far more extensive than even Marcus had initially feared. The evidence proved overwhelming: backdoor access protocols to critical infrastructure, financial transactions with foreign operatives, deliberate weakening of security systems used by government agencies. The courtroom was packed on the day of sentencing. Marcus sat in the front row, his face impassive as the judge delivered her verdict: 20 years for Blake, 15 for Peterson, on charges ranging from corporate espionage to conspiracy against the United States. The severity of the sentences reflected not just the financial impact of their crimes, but the potential national security implications had they not been stopped. Victoria's case, by comparison, moved more swiftly through the system. Her cooperation with investigators and full confession to the assault on Eleanor led to a reduced sentence, 8 years, with possibility of parole after 5. When the sentence was announced, Marcus watched her face for some sign of the woman he had married, some flicker of the person he had once loved. What he saw instead was resignation, a quiet acceptance of consequences too long deferred. Eleanor had chosen not to attend Victoria's sentencing. "I've already forgiven her," she told Marcus the evening before. "My presence would only make it harder for her to begin whatever journey she needs to take now." 6 months after the arrests, life had settled into a new rhythm. Eleanor's burns had healed, though faint scars remained on her arms. Badges of survival, she called them, with characteristic pragmatism. She had moved from the Hamptons mansion, which Marcus had sold, into a comfortable garden apartment in Brooklyn, where she could tend flowers on her small terrace and enjoy the visits of neighborhood children who quickly adopted her as an honorary grandmother. Marcus had stepped back from day-to-day operations at Williams Tech, appointing a respected industry veteran as CEO while he focused on the company's complete security overhaul. The stock price had taken a significant hit when the espionage was revealed, but was slowly recovering as new, more transparent security protocols were implemented and trust rebuilt. But the most significant change in Marcus's life was neither personal nor professional, but purposeful. 3 months after the trial concluded, he had established the Eleanor Williams Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to protecting elderly individuals from financial exploitation and supporting victims of such abuse. It was on the foundation's opening day that Marcus found himself standing before a small gathering at its modest headquarters in downtown Manhattan. The space was deliberately welcoming, open and airy, with comfortable seating areas where elderly visitors could receive financial counseling, legal advice, or simply find community among others who had experienced similar exploitation. "My mother taught me many things throughout my life," Marcus told the assembled guests, his eyes finding Eleanor in the front row, seated in her wheelchair but dressed elegantly for the occasion. "How to work hard, how to persevere through difficulty, how to build something meaningful." But her greatest lesson came only recently, when she showed me that our truest strength isn't measured by how we avoid hardship, but by how we respond to it. He gestured to the space around them. "This foundation exists because an extraordinary woman refused to let pain define her. When she was attacked, literally burned by someone she should have been able to trust, she responded not with bitterness or hatred, but with a determination to protect others from similar harm." Eleanor's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but her smile was radiant. Around her sat not just the foundation staff and board members, but several elderly individuals who had already benefited from its services during the soft launch phase. "We live in a world where financial exploitation of the elderly has become increasingly sophisticated," Marcus continued. "From complex investment scams to family members abusing power of attorney, these crimes aren't just about money. They're about dignity, independence, and trust. The Eleanor Williams Foundation stands against these abuses, offering not just protection and recovery services, but a community that affirms the inherent value and wisdom of our elders." After the speeches concluded and the ceremonial ribbon was cut, Marcus found himself standing beside his mother on the small rooftop garden that crowned the foundation building. The space had been designed with her input: raised beds accessible to wheelchair users, gentle pathways, sheltered seating areas where counseling sessions could be held in the healing presence of growing things. "It's beautiful, Marky," Eleanor said, reaching for his hand, "more than I ever could have imagined." "It's just the beginning," he replied, sitting on a bench beside her wheelchair. "We're already getting calls from organizations across the country wanting to establish satellite locations. The need is enormous." Eleanor nodded, her expression growing thoughtful as she gazed out over the Manhattan skyline. "I received a letter from Victoria yesterday." Marcus stiffened slightly. Though his mother occasionally mentioned Victoria, he had maintained a strict silence about his ex-wife. The divorce had been finalized 3 months after her sentencing, the papers signed in a prison visiting room without conversation beyond the necessary legalities. "What did she want?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "To apologize, again, and to ask if she could contribute somehow to the foundation's work." Eleanor turned to look at him directly. "She has a skill set that could be valuable: understanding of financial schemes, knowledge of how predators identify vulnerable targets." You can't be serious, Marcus said, unable to keep the edge from his voice. After what she did to you, to us? I'm not suggesting she worked directly with clients, Eleanor clarified. But perhaps she could help develop educational materials, review cases for warning signs others might miss, all remotely, of course, given her circumstances. Marcus stood, moving to the garden railing. The idea of incorporating Victoria into any aspect of the Foundation's work felt like contamination of something pure and meaningful. Yet he recognized the pragmatic wisdom in what his mother was suggesting. Victoria's insights could potentially help protect others. You don't have to decide now, Eleanor said gently, or ever, if that's your choice. But consider this. Her actions, terrible as they were, have led to something positive. This foundation wouldn't exist without the crisis that preceded it. That doesn't justify what she did, Marcus countered. No, it doesn't, Eleanor agreed. Nothing could. But redemption isn't about erasing past wrongs. It's about creating future good that might not otherwise have existed. Marcus sighed, recognizing the beginning of a philosophical discussion his mother had been gradually steering him toward over the past months. The ledger of love again? Eleanor smiled. You're learning. Before he could respond, Thomas Chambers appeared at the rooftop entrance. Since the revelations about his cooperation with federal authorities, Thomas had maintained a careful distance, understanding that his connection to Victoria made his presence in Marcus's life complicated. Today, however, he had accepted Eleanor's invitation to the opening. Mrs. Williams, Thomas said, approaching hesitantly, the executive director is looking for you. Something about a potential donor wanting to meet the Foundation's namesake. Of course, Eleanor nodded, turning her wheelchair toward the door. You two take a moment to talk. I'll see you downstairs. As Eleanor departed, an awkward silence fell between the two men. Once close friends and almost brothers-in-law, they now occupied an uncertain territory. Not quite friends, no longer family, but bound by shared experience of the same betrayal. Your mother is remarkable, Thomas finally said. After everything that happened, she still treats me like family. She has a capacity for forgiveness I'm still trying to understand, Marcus admitted. Sometimes I think she forgives too easily. Thomas leaned against the railing beside Marcus. Maybe. Or maybe she just sees people more clearly than the rest of us, sees past what we've done to who we might become. Marcus studied Thomas's profile, noting the changes the past months had wrought. Once carefree and somewhat cynical, Thomas now carried himself with a quiet seriousness. The strain of his double role, appearing to participate in his sister's criminal activities while secretly reporting to federal authorities, had clearly taken its toll. Why didn't you come to me directly? Marcus asked, the question that had lingered between them for months. When you realized what Victoria and the others were doing, why go to the FBI instead of your friend? Thomas turned to face him directly. Would you have believed me? If I'd told you your wife, your CFO, and your oldest friend were all involved in an international criminal conspiracy? Without evidence? Marcus considered this. Probably not, he admitted reluctantly. And even if you had, your first instinct would have been to confront them directly. Your nature is to address problems head-on. Thomas shook his head. These people were dangerous, Marcus. Really dangerous. I needed the protection of federal authorities before moving against them. And Victoria? Your own sister? Pain flickered across Thomas's features. I tried to get her out. For months before going to the authorities, I begged her to stop, to come clean to you, to find another way, but she was in too deep and too afraid of the consequences, both legal and personal. Personal. She was terrified of losing you, Thomas said quietly, of you discovering what she'd done, who she really was. The deeper she got, the more impossible it seemed to find a way back. Marcus turned away, looking out over the city skyline again. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow across the urban landscape. Somewhere in a federal prison upstate, Victoria was watching the same sunset through barred windows. I don't know if I can ever forgive her, he said after a long moment, even if my mother can. No one's asking you to, Thomas replied. Certainly not Victoria. In her last letter to me, she specifically said she doesn't expect or deserve your forgiveness, just that she hopes someday you might find peace." Marcus didn't respond, but something in those words penetrated the armor he'd built around his heart. Not peace with Victoria, perhaps, but peace within himself, an acceptance of what had happened and a determination not to let it define his future. The rooftop door opened again as Maya Patel stepped out. Since the crisis, Maya had left Williams Tech to become the foundation's director of cybersecurity, developing programs to protect elderly individuals from online scams and digital exploitation. Her technical brilliance, combined with a newfound passion for elder protection, had made her an invaluable part of the foundation's leadership. "Marcus, the press are asking for a few more photos," she said, "and your mother is holding court downstairs like she was born to it. I think half the board is ready to resign and just let her run everything." Marcus smiled, the tension of the previous conversation easing. "That wouldn't be the worst idea. She's always been the wisest among us." As they made their way back downstairs, Marcus found himself contemplating the strange journey that had brought them all to this point. 6 months ago, his world had been shattered by betrayal and violence. The people he had trusted most had proved false. His company had been compromised, his marriage revealed as a calculated deception. Yet, from those ashes had risen something unexpected, a purpose beyond profit, a community built around protection rather than exploitation, a deeper connection with the mother whose sacrifice had made his success possible in the first place. And perhaps, though he was not yet ready to fully embrace it, the first tentative steps toward the kind of forgiveness Eleanor had modeled. When he rejoined Eleanor downstairs, she was surrounded by a small group of elderly individuals, each sharing stories of financial exploitation they had survived. Their faces lit up as they spoke with her, recognizing in her not just sympathy, but genuine understanding. The wisdom of someone who had faced manipulation and violence, yet emerged with her compassion intact. "My son thinks I'm too forgiving," she was saying as Marcus approached, unaware of his presence. "And maybe he's right. But I found that holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I'd rather use what energy I have left to build something good." "Even after what that woman did to you?" asked one of the group, an elderly man whose children had emptied his retirement accounts. "How do you find that kind of forgiveness?" Eleanor considered the question seriously. "I don't think forgiveness is something you find," she said finally. "I think it's something you choose, again and again, until it becomes a habit of the heart, not because the person who hurt you deserves it, but because you deserve peace." As Marcus listened to his mother's words, something shifted within him, not a complete transformation, but a small opening, like a crack in a dam that might eventually release the pent-up waters of his anger and grief. He wasn't ready to forgive Victoria, or Richard, or Alan. Might never be. But he was beginning to understand that his mother's capacity for forgiveness wasn't naivete or weakness, but a profound strength born of a lifetime of overcoming obstacles. That evening, after the guests had departed and the foundation staff had gone home, Marcus wheeled Eleanor through a small side garden designed specifically for rehabilitation therapy. Here, residents of the attached transitional housing facility, elderly victims of abuse recovering their independence, could practice mobility skills while tending plants and enjoying fresh air. "I've been thinking about what you said on the roof," Marcus told her as they paused beside a small reflecting pool, "about Victoria contributing to the foundation's work." Eleanor waited, giving him space to continue at his own pace. "I'm not ready for that," he admitted. "Not yet. But I understand why you suggested it, and I respect the intention behind it." "That's all I can ask," Eleanor replied, her hand finding his. "Each of us heals in our own time, in our own way." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the last light of day play across the surface of the water. Small lily pads floated serenely, anchored to the bottom of the pool, yet free to move with the gentle currents. Like life itself, Marcus thought, rooted in what came before, yet not bound to remain there forever. "You know what this reminds me of?" Eleanor said, gesturing to the pool. "That summer at Lake George, after your father died. How lost we both were then." Marcus nodded, remembering. They had scraped together enough money for a weekend at a modest cabin, seeking solace after months of grief. He had been 14, angry at the world, at the cancer that had taken his father, at the unfairness of it all. "You told me to watch the water," he recalled, "to see how it could be both changed by every ripple yet remain fundamentally itself." "You remember," Eleanor smiled. "You were so upset that day, threw rocks into the lake until your arm was sore. And you didn't try to stop me or tell me to calm down. You just sat with me until I was ready to talk." "Some storms need to be weathered, not avoided," Eleanor said softly. "True for angry teenagers, true for billionaire tech founders facing betrayal." Marcus laughed, a genuine sound that surprised him with its lightness. "How did you get so wise, Mom?" "By making every mistake in the book first," she replied with a wink. "Wisdom's just the scar tissue of experience, Marky. And speaking of scars," she ran her fingers lightly over the healing marks on her arms, "these remind me every day that pain can be endured, that wounds heal, that what matters isn't what happens to us, but what we build from it." As twilight deepened around them, the small garden lights came on automatically, casting a gentle glow across the water. In that peaceful moment, surrounded by plants that would help heal others as they grew, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not the feverish optimism of his early entrepreneurial days or the complacent certainty of his success, but something more grounded and authentic. A quiet confidence that whatever came next, the foundation beneath him was solid. The water that had once scalded his mother's skin, that had revealed the treachery lurking in his home and company, that had washed away the illusions he had built his life upon, that same element now reflected stars appearing in the evening sky. Cool and healing in its transformed purpose, like the foundation itself, like his mother's scarred but open heart, like his own life, forever changed but not destroyed by betrayal's boiling touch. True strength isn't shown in wealth or power, but in the ability to forgive when it's difficult. Have you ever had to forgive someone who deeply hurt you? Share your journey in the comments. If this story has touched your heart, give it a like to help it reach others who need this message. How has an experience of betrayal ultimately led to something positive in your life? Your story might inspire someone facing their own challenges right now. 5 years had passed since the day Marcus Williams walked into his home and found his wife pouring boiling water on his mother. 5 years since betrayal had scalded not just Eleanor's skin, but the very foundation of Marcus's world. In that time, the healing, both physical and emotional, had progressed in ways none of them could have predicted. The Eleanor Williams Foundation had expanded beyond its original Manhattan headquarters to 12 locations across the country. What had begun as a modest effort to protect elderly individuals from financial exploitation had blossomed into a nationally recognized organization with comprehensive services, financial counseling, legal advocacy, recovery support, and even transitional housing for elderly abuse survivors rebuilding their lives. On a bright autumn morning, Eleanor Williams sat in her wheelchair in the foundation's main garden, a sprawling therapeutic space that had once been a neglected lot adjacent to the headquarters building. Today, the garden teemed with life, raised beds bursting with fall flowers, wheelchair-accessible pathways winding between fruit trees, elderly clients working with therapists to regain strength and confidence as they tended plants. At 78, Eleanor remained a vital presence, her silver hair caught in a simple braid, her eyes bright with purpose. The burns on her arms had faded to silvery scars that she made no effort to hide. Battle wounds, she called them when curious children asked. Reminders that we can heal from almost anything. She checked her watch, smiling as she heard familiar footsteps approaching from behind. Her son, punctual as always, despite now running both his technology company and the foundation's board. "Already waiting for me, I see," Marcus said, bending to kiss her cheek before settling onto a bench beside her wheelchair. At 41, he looked more at ease in his skin than he had in his younger, more driven days. Success had matured into purpose. Ambition had mellowed into steady commitment. "I wanted to enjoy the morning quiet," Eleanor replied. "The garden's especially beautiful today. Rachel has done wonders with the new therapy section." Marcus smiled at the mention of his wife. Rachel Chen, A trauma psychologist who had initially been hired as a consultant for the foundation had become first his colleague, then his friend, and finally, 2 years ago, his wife. Their partnership, built on shared values and mutual respect, stood in stark contrast to the illusions of his first marriage. "She'll be joining us soon," Marcus said, "just finishing a session with the new support group." Eleanor nodded approvingly. "The elder abuse survivors, how are they progressing?" "Remarkably well," according to Rachel. "Something about working in the garden while talking seems to make the healing process more organic." He glanced around at the peaceful space. "No pun intended." Eleanor laughed, the sound carrying across the garden and drawing smiles from several elderly residents working nearby. Her joy had become a fixture at the foundation, a living testament to the resilience they all sought to nurture. "Have you heard from Victoria?" she asked after a moment, her voice gentle but direct. Even after 5 years, the name still caused a subtle tension in Marcus's shoulders. "Her parole officer called yesterday," he acknowledged. "She settled into the halfway house in Connecticut, following all the conditions of her release." Victoria had served 5 years of her 8-year sentence before being granted parole, a reduced term reflective of her complete cooperation with authorities and exemplary behavior while incarcerated. Throughout her imprisonment, she had maintained contact only with Eleanor, respecting Marcus's clear desire for no communication. "And the foundation work?" Eleanor asked. This had been Eleanor's doing, her insistence 2 years into Victoria's sentence that they allow her to contribute remotely to the foundation's educational materials. Victoria had proven unexpectedly valuable. Her intimate knowledge of financial exploitation schemes, helping develop prevention programs that had protected countless elderly individuals. The new scam identification guide she helped develop has been adopted by senior centers in 32 states, Marcus admitted. "I can't deny its effectiveness." Eleanor studied her son's face, noting the complex emotions that still surfaced whenever they discussed his ex-wife. "You've come a long way, you know. There was a time you couldn't hear her name without leaving the room." "I've had an excellent teacher in forgiveness," Marcus replied, taking his mother's hand gently. "Not forgiveness," Eleanor corrected. "Understanding. There's a difference. Forgiveness is something you grant another person. Understanding is something you develop for yourself." Their conversation paused as Rachel approached, her warm smile crinkling the corners of her eyes. At 42, she carried herself with quiet confidence, her practical clothing and minimal jewelry reflecting the same authentic approach she brought to her work. "The garden committee has a question about the new meditation space," she said, after greeting Eleanor with a hug. "Would you mind offering your opinion? They value your input more than anyone's." "Of course," Eleanor replied, already turning her wheelchair toward the far corner of the garden where several elderly residents were gathered. "I've had some thoughts about making it accessible for those with limited mobility." As Eleanor moved away, Rachel took her place beside Marcus on the bench. "She's amazing," she said, watching her mother-in-law immediately engage with the residents, listening intently to their ideas. "Sometimes I forget everything she's been through." "She doesn't let it define her," Marcus agreed. "Never has." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the foundation's community in action around them. In one corner, a retired financial advisor volunteered his expertise, helping an elderly woman untangle a complex insurance scam. Near the central fountain, an art therapist led a small group through exercises designed to restore confidence and agency. By the vegetable garden, 2 elderly men, both survivors of exploitation by family members, worked side by side, finding healing in the simple act of growing food. "The reporter's coming at noon," Rachel reminded him, "for the 5-year anniversary piece." Marcus nodded. "The PR team briefed me. It's a good opportunity to raise awareness, especially with the elder abuse statistics continuing to rise." "Have you decided about Victoria's interview request?" Rachel asked carefully. The question hung between them. The reporter had asked if Victoria, now released and working remotely as a consultant identifying financial scams, could be included in the story, a redemption narrative to complement the foundation's success. "I'm still considering it," Marcus said after a moment. "Part of me thinks it might help others see that recovery is possible for everyone involved in these situations. Another part still feels the betrayal," Rachel finished gently. "That's natural, Marcus. No one expects you to be completely healed, not even your mother." Before he could respond, his phone buzzed with a notification. "Thomas is here," he said, checking the screen, "at the front entrance." Thomas Chambers had become the Foundation's Director of Technology, overseeing the development of apps and online resources that helped elderly individuals protect themselves from digital exploitation. His journey from peripheral participant in his sister's crimes to dedicated advocate had been its own redemption story, one that had eventually restored his friendship with Marcus. They found Thomas in the main lobby, engaged in animated conversation with Eleanor, who had apparently concluded her garden consultation and returned inside. The two were reviewing plans for a new virtual reality program designed to help seniors practice identifying scam attempts in a safe environment. "Marcus, Rachel," Thomas greeted them warmly. "I was just showing Eleanor the beta version of the VR scam simulator. The feedback from the test group has been incredible." 92% improvement in scam recognition, Eleanor added proudly, and the participants actually enjoyed the process, said it made them feel empowered rather than frightened. As the conversation turned to technical details, Marcus found his attention drifting to a framed photograph on the lobby wall, a picture from the Foundation's opening day 5 years earlier. Eleanor sat in her wheelchair, burns still visible on her arms, her smile radiant despite all she had endured. Beside her stood Marcus, his expression more guarded, still processing the betrayals that had led to that moment. The contrast between that image and today struck him forcefully. The wounds had healed, not disappeared, but transformed into something different. The pain had been channeled into purpose, the betrayal into deeper understanding, the loss into new beginnings. His reflection was interrupted by the arrival of the reporter, a thoughtful woman from a major national magazine who had been covering elder abuse issues for years. As introductions were made and the formal interview began in the Foundation's conference room, Marcus found himself answering questions that would have been unimaginable 5 years earlier. "The Foundation grew from a deeply personal experience," the reporter noted, referencing the well-known origin story. "How has your perspective on that experience evolved over these 5 years?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I've come to understand that trauma can be transformative without being defining," he said finally. "What happened to my mother, what happened to our family, was terrible. But the Foundation's work has given that experience meaning beyond the pain. And your mother's approach to forgiveness has become somewhat legendary in survivor communities," the reporter continued, glancing at Eleanor. "Would you say that philosophy is central to the Foundation's work?" "Understanding, not forgiveness," Eleanor corrected gently, echoing her earlier words to Marcus. "We never tell survivors they must forgive those who harmed them. That's a deeply personal choice. What we do emphasize is understanding of how exploitation happens, of one's own vulnerabilities, of the path forward." The interview continued for nearly an hour, covering the Foundation's programs, its impact statistics, and plans for future expansion. Throughout, Marcus was struck by how naturally the conversation flowed, how the story of betrayal had evolved into one of healing and purpose. Near the end, the reporter asked the question Marcus had been anticipating. "Your ex-wife, Victoria Williams, has recently been released after serving 5 years for the assault that ultimately led to this Foundation's creation. I understand she contributed to your educational materials while incarcerated. Will her involvement continue now that she's been released?" A brief silence fell over the room. Thomas glanced at Marcus, concern evident in his expression. Rachel's hand found Marcus's beneath the table, a gentle support without pressure. Eleanor simply waited, allowing her son the space to answer in his own way. "Victoria has unique insights into financial exploitation that have proven valuable in our prevention programs," Marcus said carefully. "While our personal relationship remains complicated, the Foundation's mission benefits from her contributions. So yes, her work as a remote consultant will continue." The reporter nodded, making a note. "Would you consider including her perspective in this article? Many readers might find her redemption journey compelling." Again, that moment of silence. Then, surprising even himself, Marcus nodded. "Yes, with appropriate context and sensitivity to our client's feelings. Her story, the full story, including her crimes, could help others understand both how exploitation happens and how recovery is possible. After the reporter departed, promising to share a draft before publication, the small group moved to the Foundation's rooftop garden, a more private space reserved for staff and special visitors. Here, overlooking the city that had seen both their greatest triumphs and deepest sorrows, they could speak freely. "Are you sure about including Victoria in the article?" Thomas asked, voicing the concern they all felt. "It's a significant step." Marcus leaned against the railing, looking out over the urban landscape. 5 years ago, I couldn't imagine ever acknowledging her existence again, let alone her contribution to something I cared deeply about. But that's the point of all this, isn't it? To show that healing is possible, that people can change, that purpose can emerge from pain. Eleanor wheeled closer, her expression thoughtful. The Foundation has always been about transformation, helping people transform their trauma into strength, their vulnerability into wisdom. Perhaps it's fitting that the same principle applies to all of us, even Victoria. Rachel nodded. The clients we serve often struggle most with feeling that their exploitation defines them, makes them somehow diminished. Seeing a complete narrative of harm, accountability, and eventual contribution might be powerful for them. As they spoke, the door to the rooftop opened again, and a Foundation staff member appeared. "Mr. Williams, there's a call for you in the office, Victoria Chambers. She says it's about the new banking scam alert system." Marcus exchanged a glance with his mother, who nodded encouragingly. "I'll take it in my office," he said, moving toward the door. The call was brief and professionally focused, Victoria describing a new pattern of exploitation targeting elderly individuals through banking apps, Marcus asking clarifying questions about detection methods. Neither mentioned the reporter or the pending article, though both surely knew about it. When the business was concluded, an awkward silence fell. "Thank you for allowing me to continue contributing," Victoria said finally, her voice carrying the weight of unspoken history. "I know it can't be easy." "It's what serves the mission best," Marcus replied, his tone neutral but not cold. Another pause. Then Victoria said softly, "Your mother called yesterday. Told me about the garden expansion. It sounds healing." "It is," Marcus acknowledged, "for many people." "I'm glad," Victoria said, and Marcus was surprised to hear what sounded like genuine emotion in her voice. "Not just for the Foundation's clients, but for all of you. Especially Eleanor." After the call ended, Marcus remained at his desk for a long moment, processing the complex feelings that still arose whenever he interacted with Victoria. The rage had subsided years ago, replaced by a dull ache that surfaced less frequently with time. Not forgiveness, perhaps, but something approaching peace. When he returned to the rooftop, the others were gathered around a small table where lunch had been laid out, a simple meal of sandwiches and fresh vegetables from the Foundation's garden. Eleanor was telling a story about one of the Foundation's first clients, her hands animated as she described the woman's journey from victimization to volunteering. "She leads our peer support group now," Eleanor concluded proudly, "says helping others heal has been the greatest gift of her life." "That seems to be a pattern around here," Rachel observed with a smile, passing a plate to Marcus as he rejoined them. "Healing through helping." "Mom's philosophy from the beginning," Marcus acknowledged, settling into a chair. "She insisted the Foundation be about empowerment, not just protection." Eleanor shrugged modestly. "I just knew what I needed after it happened. Not pity, but purpose. Not protection, but partnership in creating something meaningful." As they ate together in the peaceful rooftop setting, Marcus reflected on the journey of the past 5 years, the Foundation's growth, his marriage to Rachel, Thomas's redemption, Victoria's gradual transformation from perpetrator to contributor. And at the center of it all, his mother's quiet wisdom guiding them toward healing rather than bitterness. Later that afternoon, as most of the staff departed and the day's activities wound down, Marcus found Eleanor in her favorite spot in the main garden, a small alcove beside the reflecting pool where water lilies floated serenely on the surface. The setting sun cast a golden glow across the scene, turning the water into a mirror of amber light. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, sitting beside her wheelchair. I was just remembering the day we opened the foundation, Eleanor replied, her eyes on the gently rippling water. How raw everything still felt then. How uncertain the future seemed. Marcus nodded. I was still so angry. Could barely say Victoria's name without feeling physically ill. And now? He considered the question honestly. Now, I see her as part of a larger story. Not just the villain in our family tragedy, but a complex person who did terrible things yet is trying to make some amends. I don't know if that's forgiveness, but it's no longer consuming me. That's all healing really is, Eleanor said softly. Not the absence of scars, but the transformation of how they affect us. She ran her fingers lightly over the faded burn marks on her arms. These don't hurt anymore. They're just part of my story now. A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched the water catch the last rays of daylight. In the distance, they could hear the gentle voices of the few remaining clients finishing their day's activities. The quiet efficiency of staff preparing to close the building, the subtle hum of a city continuing its endless rhythm beyond the garden walls. Do you ever wonder how differently things might have turned out? Marcus asked. If Victoria hadn't done what she did? If we hadn't discovered the conspiracy at the company? Sometimes, Eleanor admitted. But then I look around at all this. She gestured to the foundation's garden, the building beyond, the community they had built. And I can't wish away the path that brought us here, painful as it was. She turned to face her son fully, her eyes reflecting the wisdom earned through decades of overcoming hardship. Some wounds don't live on the skin, Marcus. They live inside the heart. And sometimes the heart must be broken open before it can truly expand. As darkness fell, small lights illuminated the garden pathways, creating a gentle glow that seemed to embody Eleanor's philosophy. Not the harsh exposure of full daylight, but the compassionate illumination that allowed for both shadow and light, for complexity and healing, for truth without condemnation. In that peaceful moment, surrounded by the physical manifestation of purpose born from pain, Marcus Williams finally understood what his mother had been teaching him all along. The boiling water that had scarred Eleanor's skin had ultimately revealed the deeper truths that had transformed them all, about vulnerability and strength, betrayal and trust, suffering and redemption. The water that had once burned had become healing waters instead, reflecting stars now appearing in the evening sky. And in those reflections, Marcus could see not just what had been lost, but what had been found, a more authentic life, deeper connections, and the quiet certainty that even the most painful experiences could, in time, nourish something beautiful. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have forgiven Victoria like Eleanor suggested, or cut her out of your life completely? Let me know in the comments below. We all face betrayal at some point in our lives, and your perspective might help someone else struggling with similar decisions right now. And if you think this story was shocking, wait until you hear our next stories. Hit that subscribe button if you believe in honesty and compassion. Only people who support lies and manipulation would refuse to join us. Together, we can share stories that remind the world what truly matters. You've just listened to a true story about the power of a mother's love and the grace of forgiveness. A single drop of boiling water can burn the skin, but it's greed and ingratitude that truly burn the soul. Share your thoughts if you've ever had a mother who sacrificed her life for you. Write, "Thank you, Mom," in the comments below, along with the city or country where you're watching from. What would you do if one day you came home and saw the person you love hurting your own mother? Leave your comment, because every word you write becomes a reminder that a mother's love can't be measured by money, and forgiveness is the only road that leads us back to being human. Don't forget to like this video to help spread the message of gratitude and filial love. Share it so more people can discover our channel. See you in the next powerful true story. At Virtuous Stories, we love you.